Hey guys, tonight we descend into the lavish, absurd, and occasionally unsanitary bedrooms of medieval royalty, where power, lust, and absolutely no concept of boundaries collided in spectacular fashion. Before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love watching our little midnight map light up across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our companion this evening is King John of England, also known as John Lackland, and if you trust certain snarky chroniclers informally the worst dinner guest in British history, he's remembered for sealing the Magna Carta, misplacing a rather alarming amount of French real estate, and somehow, between treaties and tantrums, still finding time to involve himself rather enthusiastically in other people's households. His reign, from 1199 to 1216, doubles as a masterclass in how not to behave in public office. Politically chaotic, personally somehow messier, but we won't shout, we won't rush, and we definitely won't sensationalize. We'll walk slowly, like a careful servant carrying a tray through a crowded hall, and let the rooms tell us what they were built to hide. Welcome to a series that looks softly and steadily at the places where private excess and public power rehearse together behind closed doors. Think of it as a calm archaeology of reputation, how banquets became press releases, how gifts replaced treaties, how rumours did things soldiers couldn't, and how bedrooms, corridors, and counting houses collaborated to produce something that looked like government. We move at a human pace, soft voice, gentle pauses, nothing graphic. The aim is not to judge with modern fury, but to observe the old machinery while you drift, comfortably, towards sleep. So let's set the scene with the smallest of rituals. Let your room grow softer around you. Allow the lamp to settle into a low, forgiving glow. The fan hums like a polite orchestra warming up far away. If you prefer, imagine a small fireplace, tucked somewhere out of sight, letting out that quiet crackle that sounds like a secret trying its best to whisper slowly. We aren't here to chase shocks. We're here to watch how pleasure posed as policy, and how excess masqueraded as stability, in a court that wanted to appear full, rich, and orderly even when the ledger was going red. John, the star of tonight's prologue, often worked with a purse in one hand and a grudge in the other. He preferred banquets to goodwill, leverage to loyalty, and quiet pressure to clean victories. In the stories that survived, some tidy, some tangled alliances often ended not on battlefields but in back rooms. Doors closed, candles hissed, someone laughed too loudly and then much more quietly, somewhere else. A scribe put down a line on a page that would later be quoted as truth. We'll pay attention to those pages, but we'll also listen for the earlier drafts, the rumours that moved from the high table to the marketplace, and from the marketplace into the chronicles, picking up adjectives the way a cloak picks up burrs in a field. There's a reason banquets matter in this story. In a world where few people could read, a banquet was legible to everyone. The menu spoke a language of abundance. The seating chart advertised a power structure. The music, the lighting, the number of servants, all of it delivered the same message. We have enough. We are in control. We are worth following. And yet, as we will see, the bill for these messages came due somewhere else, often in a quieter room, under a harsher light, on the desk of someone who had to make numbers behave like obedient soldiers. If you were that person, the royal treasurer, quill in hand, let me plant our first question for the night. Which expense would you cut first? The public feasts or the private favours? Public feasts are loud and visible. They feed morale, flatter allies, and tell enemies you're unbothered. Private favours, on the other hand, keep inconvenient factions quiet and make sure the right letters arrive at the right doors at suspiciously opportune times. Cut the feasts and you risk looking weak. Cut the favours and you risk losing the invisible glue that keeps the court from shedding its paint. You don't have to answer now. Let the question sit in your pocket while we walk. And here's the second question to carry beside it. Is reputation more expensive than gold? Gold is straightforward. It buys food, soldiers, music, time. Reputation buys all the things gold can't. The silence of enemies, the patience of friends, and the tone in which your name is read centuries later. A king might empty a treasury and still buy loyalty with reputation, or he might spend reputation to buy a week of peace and find the treasury empty anyway. Which currency would you spend first? If you had to, again, no need to answer. Just press the thought between the pages of this evening and move with me to the door. Let's take the long way. We'll begin at the high table where the candles are clustered in polite constellations and the goblets clink like distant bells. The roast glistens in a way that suggests both victory and butter. A lute line hangs in the air like silk unwound. If you're comfortable, close your eyes for a breath and imagine the sound of a knife passing through something perfectly cooked, a soft, approving sigh of a sound. Everyone is on their best behaviour at a table like this. Even the roomers sit straighter on nights like these, combing their hair and saying your grace to anyone who will listen. Now step back. Another step. Let the music thin to a thread. Turn and walk toward the corridor, where the air cools and the stones remember how to be silent. A corridor's a truthful place. It never pretends to be anything else. The torches don't sparkle, they do their small, smoky best. The tapestries tell old stories, but in mostly earth tones. You can hear footsteps here, and breathing, and the little negotiations people have with themselves in the seconds before they enter a room in which they might be promoted or dismissed. Enriched or unmade, if the banquet is the stage, the corridor is a nerve. At the end of this one sits a plain door. The wood is honest about being wood. The hinges are honest about needing oil. Inside, the room is unremarkable. A table, a map stretching across it, with corners that don't quite lie flat, a ledger that looks heavier than paper should, a seal with a chip in it that you can't stop noticing once you notice. Here, music becomes math. Toasts become numbers, smiles become agreements, and agreements become obligations, and obligations become the kind of disputes that never make it into songs. If you listen carefully, you can hear two sounds at once: the soft, bold heart of a kingdom beating, and the crisp scratch of a pen deciding which village will feel winter more harshly this year. This quiet room is where King John's court tells truths it would prefer to express more beautifully elsewhere. Out there, it says, we are secure. In here, it says, we are expensive. Out there, it says, peace is at hand. In here, it calculates how peace might be purchased, not with treaties alone, but with gifts, appointments, and very specific silences. The danger, of course, is that gifts grow greedy, appointments develop appetites, and silences expect dessert. A banquet that feeds morale may also fatten rumour. A private favour meant to prevent a duel might start 1-2 corridors away. In a court that performs confidence, backstage is crowded with stage managers who swear they can fix it in the next act. John understood all of this perhaps too well. Where other rulers looked for loyalty, he often looked for leverage. Where some kings declared victories in public, John preferred to arrange necessary outcomes in private. He could be violent, yes, but he was also a student of the smaller weapons: position, patience, and price. Raise a tax here, lower a voice there. Move a chair 3 seats down the table and watch a man discover he has fewer friends than he thought. Send a gift to a household and watch 2 brothers begin to wonder which one is truly trusted. If a sword is a line, a court is a web, and John handled the web with sticky, restless fingers. In the gossip that survives, you can hear people trying to explain the feeling of living near such a king. They talk about youths promoted too quickly, favourites dressed too brightly, rooms that felt warmer than they should, and doors that closed for longer than a conversation ought to take. They talk about the taste of a public smile that has been smiling for too many hours. They mention how often a gift took the place of an argument, and how rarely an argument ended when the gift did. They retell stories that feel suspiciously designed. Stories that pin a mood to a person, as if human beings were tidy enough to obey the outline. So here is how we'll travel. With care, we will not diagnose from a distance, and we will not pretend that rumour is evidence. We'll let rumour do what rumour does, set the temperature, and then we'll go looking for the fire. We will visit the places where John liked to look strongest. The great hall, where light multiplies. The chapel, where quiet is the rule. The audience chamber, where words try to wear armour. The treasury, where numbers pretend to be obedient, and occasionally we will keep the pace of someone who knows there are guards, but also knows how to act as though she belongs. And when we speak of harshness, because there will be harshness, we will do it in the tone one uses to carry a glass of water in the dark. Take another breath for me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. If you are lying down, let your shoulders sink a little deeper. If you are sitting, let your spine remember what a chair is for. You're safe here, and you are not in a hurry. The past can seem loud when it is first invited in, but it becomes very polite once it realizes you intend to listen. Now, as we stand together in this plain room with the long map and the short tempers, let me translate what the furniture is saying. The map says, someone will pay for the message the banquet sent. The ledger says, we need this many coins to say what we said again tomorrow. The seal says, we will make it look official. And the door says, whatever happens next will happen where fewer eyes can see it. It is in this room, not the glittering one, that pleasure introduces itself as policy. It is here that a chamber becomes a chamber of commerce, in the old, elastic sense of both words. If you listen even more carefully, you'll catch the last echo from the high table, a single laugh, trying to sound spontaneous for the 12th time tonight. You'll hear the corridor breathing like a bellows, and you'll hear our questions rustle in your pocket, asking very softly to be remembered. Which expense first? Public feasts or private favours? Which currency first? Reputation or gold? You don't have to answer yet. You only have to keep walking with me. When we open this door again, we'll follow John from performance to calculation and back, watching how a king feeds a court until the court looks stable, how a ledger turns red while the candles pretend everything is gold, and how a reputation grows taller in the retelling. Long after the man himself has become a footnote with opinions attached, there will be music, and there will be math. There will be warmth, and there will be cold. But we will be gentle with all of it, because gentleness is often the best kind of precision. So one more breath, in and out. If the lights aren't low yet, go ahead and dim them now. If the fan isn't on, give yourself that soft, friendly hum. Drop a quick hello in the comments. Tell me where you are and what time it is, so we can make a constellation of listeners before we begin. Then come back to this table with the map and the ledger and the chipped seal. Tonight, King John will show us how courts are fed and how stories are cooked, how a smile can sponsor a policy, how a gift can finish a sentence, and how power, lust, and the wonderful, terrible human talent for rationalizing excess all fit under one roof. Ready? Good. Let's begin. Start by tapping a fingernail lightly on the southern coast where the Channel winds carry salt and news of Normandy. From here, John doesn't just see water, he sees memory. Memory of lands across the sea that had been assets of the English crown since the Normans waded in, set foot at Hastings, and changed the language of court. The 12th century unspooled as a chain of couplings, marriages, truces, indictments, manacles, anything to lash Anglo-Norman power to both shores. By the time John wore the crown, 1199, those ropes had begun to fray. The territories over their Normandy, Anjou, Poitou were not merely colours on parchment, they were storehouses of honour. Lose them, and you don't just grow poorer. The face of kingship grows thin. Draw your eyes up through the Midlands and north, and you meet the nobility's stone fortresses set like joints along the arm of royal authority. They are allies when well fed and adversaries when left hungry. Feudal order is a circulatory system. Land is the blood. Taxation the heartbeat. Favour the oxygen. When war in France demands money, money comes from taxes, and taxes pass through noble hands, hands that can translate revenue into loyalty or resentment with nothing more than a shrug. Brush your palm over the town's London, Winchester, the ports, and you'll hear money whisper in silk purses. In this age, coin is a signature that opens doors without drawing a sword. But money doesn't grow on the tapestries, it is pressed out. Salt duties, wine dues, quay fees, and those purchases of silence a crown prefers when it must outrun its own laws. Hover above it all, and you'll see a cloud that both shades and watches. The church, ecclesiastical power, doesn't ride to battle daily, but it wields language that can make victory read like providence and defeat read like rebuke. From the pulpit, a king is an anointed instrument. From a single letter, A single decree, the church can freeze political waters until every boat sits motionless. At the crossroads of crowned nobility church, each decision John makes sounds 3 echoes, one in the treasury, one in a great hall, and one from the lectern, war tax nobility church. 4 legs of the power table. When one leg wobbles, every goblet trembles. In the late 12th and early 13th centuries, the table would not stand still. French lands slipped, cash in the chest wheezed, baronial loyalties flickered, churchmen furrowed brows. John ruled to the sound of wood complaining. Each choice, laying another banquet or shifting a seat of honour, is an attempt to rebalance the table so the wine does not spill before its cue. We dip a quill and write the first heading. Chronicles, monastic and courtly chroniclers record, year upon year, the bare scaffold of events, battles, new imposts, deaths, marriages. They're not always neutral. They are human, with sympathies and fears. In their pages you hear church bells ringing through ink. Victory reads as God's hand, setback as heaven's warning. Chronicles give us the spine dates and bones, but their muscle and skin are often coloured by the cloister. Beside them lie political letters, wax-sealed sheets travelling by envoy, then vanishing into some drawer of history. Letters are immediate temperature, hot when angry, cold when afraid, warm when currying favour. They show us language not yet edited, all the if-then seems visible like forehead lines. But a letter is a snapshot, it catches the moment. The feature length of an episode is not always rolling. Read correspondence without context and a passing gust looks like a season of storms. Edge down the table and lift folklore where the market is a printing press without ink. Here one banquet night becomes 10 stories, each threaded with a new colour. The folk have a craft, turning true emotions into invented details that still capture the spirit of an age. They say John lost lands, raised taxes, loved to lay on feasts things with roots. They embroider bedrooms and shadows to make the tale memorable. Folklore won't give you evidence, it gives you weather, and weather often presses harder than documents. Finally, open a thin folder. Satirical verse. Here morality wears a jester's cap. The sermon speaks through a smile. Satire slides a single vice beneath a magnifying glass. One wasteful expense becomes the emblem of decay. One quiet favour becomes proof of a system. Read it as an indictment and you'll go astray. Read it as a windsock, a gauge of what the crowd thinks it smells, and you'll be close to right. Bind these 4 together and a simple truth appears. Many accusations are faction made. Chronicles have house tones. Letters carry the breath of their authors. Folklore answers the needs of collective memory. Satire works with a stage light. Truth rarely stands alone in the courtyard. It walks beside rumour, locks arms with prejudice, and sometimes wears a hat someone else shoved on its head. Our task tonight is not to strip anyone bare, but to annotate the painting, giving each brushstroke its small caption. According to A Letter Between X and Y suggests, tradition relates that, so how shall we tell this? Keep the voice even like the room's fan, keep the light low like the last torch on the corridor. Each time we touch a thorny detail, we place a cushion in front of it. According to the chronicle of letters between A and B indicate, folklore describes, not to defang it, but to seat it properly so listeners know the address of every shard. We will not paste modern diagnoses onto medieval behaviour. When we meet stories of harsh conduct or overblown feasts, we will not reach for 21st century labels. We will frame them. Wars need money. Money needs pretexts. Pretexts need rituals, and ritual is often prettier than truth. If we must say madness, we will use it as their language used it, as a name for what they didn't fully understand and sometimes exploited when useful. We will also avoid graphic description. Instead of counting lashes, we'll count chairs that move around the table. Instead of itemizing punishments, we'll listen to the treasurer's voice crack slightly as he reads the red lines. Because power, in the end, is the art of staging, renaming indulgence as festival, bribe as favour, threat as order, and tonight we perform one simple service. We translate the signage back into plain human speech. If you agree, we'll proceed as though walking a museum after hours, hands off the artifacts, eyes adjusting to the dark, ears catching the sound of old parchment brushing old parchment. Every conclusion wears soft shoes. Every assertion comes with a hook on which Later, if you like, you can hang your own question. We fold the map and set the chip seal upon it, a polite nod to the guides that brought us here. Outside, the music from the great hall grows thinner, while the scratch of a pen on the ledger grows clearer. The set is dressed, the table with 4 legs of power, the 4 kinds of sauces, and our way of walking through the room. Now ease the door open and let the corridor's draught carry us toward the story of banquets that called themselves policy, and expenses that insisted on being named honour. We go on. Think of John's temperament as a hand that never stopped counting. The fingers tally coin. The thumb presses on people for answers they haven't offered yet. He has the nerve of a gambler and the patience of a clerk. In the morning he is arithmetic. By night he is theatre. In between, he is a collection of needs wrapped in a cloak that insists on calling them necessities. The first need is money not as ornament, but as oxygen. War across the channel writes invoices in iron. Ships do not row themselves. Mercenaries do not fight on gratitude. Castles do not repair out of loyalty. Every command in France echoes as a sum in England. John feels those echoes in his teeth. He grinds them into levies and aids, into fees at bridges and dues in harbours. He looks at a river and sees not sparkling water, but a tariff. He looks at a festival and sees licensing. He looks at silence and hears the price people will take to keep it. The treasury is no longer a chest, it is a lung. If it wheezes, the body of state grows faint. But the second need is theatrical, a need to show that there is enough. John has a weakness, and it is not a private vice. It is a public instinct toward display. He trusts spectacle the way a general trusts drums. He believes that if the drum is loud enough and steady enough, the army will find its step, and so the banquets heavy with silver, layered with courses, rehearsed like pageants, become more than appetite. They are broadcasts, signals fired into the minds of guests, and through them, into the countryside. The crown is abundant. The crown is confident. The crown has room to be generous. The third need lies behind both control of information. Where others see gossip as a nuisance, John sees a supply chain. He wants to know what the market is whispering, what the chapter house is reconsidering, what the Baron's steward muttered to the groom at dawn. Information is the only currency that doubles in value once you spend it correctly. John does not necessarily love truth. He loves leverage, and truth is welcome when it behaves like leverage. He keeps messengers in motion, scribes at the ready, and makes a habit of rewarding the softly spoken, the inconspicuous, the man who never seems to be in the room and yet always knows what the room decided. Temperamentally, he distrusts the obvious. Loud loyalty makes him suspicious. Quiet competence pleases him more. He can be quick with temper and quicker with calculation. One moment he speaks like a lord who expects the world to tilt. The next he narrows a question to a price. This is not stability. Exactly. It is agility useful on a battlefield, unnerving at a desk. Those who serve him learn to watch the jaw for the clench, the eyes for the gleam that means the game is shifted and the deck is being dealt again. And always the money. Even pleasure is counted. A song is weighed against its effect. A jewel is measured by the silence it buys. He knows the ledger is the most honest man in the room, even when it lies for him in public. When he drinks as if to coat the throat so orders will slide out smoother. When he laughs, the laugh lands like a coin. It buys the next minute of ease before the price goes up. If you could stand beside him at the window after a feast, you'd hear how he breathes. Not quite satisfied, not quite sated alert. He watches torches go out in the yard and counts them as if they were votes. If a noble leaves early, he notes it. If the choir boy falters in the final hymn, he notes that too. Everything is a note. Nothing is ever only what it is. This is John's gift and John's danger. It makes him effective, it makes him exhausting. And because the kingdom must live inside the king's weather, it grows watchful as well, breathing shallow, listening hard. Draw the circle closer and you'll find the operators. They rarely command the stage. They arrange it. Each of them holds a tool that, in other hands, would be a mere accessory. In John's orbit, each tool becomes a lever. First is the keeper of the keys, the mind that knows not only what the treasury holds, but what it will be forced to hold tomorrow. He speaks in terms of flows, coin flowing in from wool and wine, flowing out to ships and stipends, diverted through the discreet channels where silence is purchased, wholesale, and sold retail as compliance. He is not sentimental. He doesn't believe a kingdom can love its way out of a debt. He believes it must price its way out. He brings the king bad news like a man carrying a mirror. John does not shoot the mirror. He changes the angle until the reflection is a little more flattering, and the necessary cuts have an elegant name. Next is the master of revels, the architect of banquets and public graces. He is both caterer and choreographer, diplomat and illusionist. He knows exactly how many candles make a table look generous and how many make it look nervous. He understands seating the way a tactician understands terrain. Move one lord 2 chairs to the left and you shift a border. Place an upstart merchant between 2 old families and you stage a future loan. The master of revels orders music not for its beauty alone, but for the way melody can massage mood until men mistake comfort for loyalty. When he succeeds, policy slips past under the cover of applause. Standing just outside the light is the hand that enforces the officer, whose duty is to make sure the king's decisions are not merely decisions, but facts. He keeps cells ready, doors that close softly and stay closed, roads that can be watched without being seen to be watched. He is not cruel for sport. He treats fear like any other instrument in the royal orchestra, tuned, measured, brought in only when a passage demands emphasis, but his presence changes the temperature of a hallway. People smile less broadly where he stands, and words grow careful syllable by syllable. There are others, the scribe who can shape a rumour by shaping a letter, the messenger whose neutrality is a performance so perfect it wins him invitations no herald should receive, the steward who knows which servants gossip and how to value that gossip, the chaplain who understands the altitude at which absolution becomes policy. Together, they form a mechanism, pulleys and counterweights that can make a court look still, while everything inside it is moving. And then, threaded through the machinery, the economy of favour. With John, favour is rarely free. It is a contract that pretends to be a compliment. A bracelet may carry with it an office. A place by the fire may attach itself to a promise. A laugh at the right moment might be repayable in horses by spring. Those closest to the king know the prices without speaking them aloud. They know the difference between a present and a signal, between a private word and a public instruction that accidentally found itself spoken in a private room. The system works. In its way, it keeps the lights on and the news managed. It lets the kingdom feel governed. It also breeds anxieties. Those who rise by favour fear the next favour that will replace them. Those who keep accounts in their heads sleep shallowly. The officers watch the mood of the king the way sailors watch the sky, and the king never quite finished counting watches them back. If you want to hear this machine in motion, listen for tiny sounds. The metal tap of a key on a table while a figure is considered. The soft arithmetic of gulp, pause, gulp as a toast is measured for sincerity. The tick of quill against teeth while a scribe chooses between grant and license. In those micro noises, the macros decided a harvest will be leaner in one county than another. A family will seat a different son at table. A guard will stand closer to one door than yesterday. And by midnight, the court will look exactly as it did at dusk, which is how you know the mechanism has worked. Step back a pace and see the whole. The throne is less a chair than a proscenium. John understands this. He arranges his reign as a sequence of scenes whose scenery is both beautiful and legible. Music is chosen not only to please, but to translate, to tell those who cannot read charters what the charters say. We are settled, we are strong, we know our lines. Ritual frames policy as inevitability. The way a sunrise frames the day, proclamations arrive with choreography, the seal thumps, the clerk intones. The steward bows, and for a moment the untidy business of rule feels inevitable, which is to say acceptable. Watch how a banquet becomes a policy document. The opening course is reassurance bread and salt, continuity and welcome. The second course is memory game from forests that used to belong to a rival, now served in slices that tranquilize old arguments. The third course is proposal and exotic fruit that has travelled at cost, reminding everyone that money can cross borders if the will exists. The sweet course is promised sugar arranged like a city that will prosper when a certain tax is agreed. The after wine is warning dark and heavy, served slowly, while the master of revels lets the conversation settle exactly where the king would like it to be found tomorrow morning. When the feast empties into the corridor, the herald takes over. His voice is the footnote to the spectacle. He names the honours conferred, the offices created, the marriages smiled upon. He does not name the debts inferred, the obligations created, the corridors where smiles go to cool. But the herald is not the only narrator. The minstrel has his own synopsis sung, and the market will improvise another by dawn. John knows this and writes for them. He places lines in the air that can be carried intact into an alehouse, phrases clipped to travel, rumours designed with handles. The stagecraft extends to silence. Sometimes the most eloquent thing a king can do is not attend. John withholds himself like a spotlight withheld. A council meets, he does not come. A rumour arrives in his stead and takes the chair. The rumour bows, delivers a message, and adjourns with more authority than a man could have mustered. The next day, a letter arrives to clarify what was never said. The clarification feels generous, measured. The audience, grateful to be back in light, forgets how effectively the dark worked. Even piety has lighting cues. A morning at the chapel is scheduled where it will do most good. The collect chosen is never random. The anthem can be an argument in Latin. An alms distribution is timed for the 11th hour, when stomachs are empty and gratitude is large. The chaplain speaks of order, the steward counts heads, the chronicler notes virtue. By Vespers, the day has told a story about a kingdom that knows where it's going, even if the map in the counting room says otherwise. And yet, this is not all cynicism. The throne as stage is also the throne as compass. A frightened court needs ritual, a hungry court needs sound, a wavering noble needs the exact pressure of a chair placed honourably, and a gaze held just long enough. John's genius is to blend entertainment and evidence so thoroughly that even those who resent him are compelled to applaud the craft. He does not always choose the right play. He sometimes forgets the cost of mounting it, but he rarely forgets that governing and staging in his century are neighbours with a shared wall. When the orchestra warms, policy finds its cue, so we return to the small chamber. On the king's work table, the seal authority, the ledger reality, the goblet still fizzing performance, the half-open music mood, 4 props, 4 truths. Authority must be stamped, reality must be paid, performance must be poured, mood must be tuned. John moves among them like a man adjusting lamps before guests arrive. A turn here, a trim there. Then the door opens and the world comes in, and for an hour the kingdom believes what it is shown, because believing is cheaper than arguing and more pleasant than doubt. When the hour ends, the goblet is empty but still shining, the ledger heavier but closed, the seal cooling to its chip, the music page curling at the corner. Servants will tidy. The corridor will yawn and swallow back the night. And John counting, staging, listening will walk to the next room where policy puts on a different costume and calls itself mercy, or prudence, or peace. We'll follow him there, but for a beat. Let's stand with these props and hear what they've been saying all along. Seal, I can make the world nod. Ledger, I can make the world pay. Goblet, I can make the world relax. Music, I can make the world agree. And the throne, which is not a prop but a place, whispers its honest line. I can make the world watch. The door to the small chamber breathes shut behind us, and the corridor loosens into music again, soft at first, then fuller, as if the hall itself were exhaling. Turn your head and the light multiplies. The air grows warmer by degrees, scented with clove and orange, pepper and smoke. We are moving back toward the great hall, but the hall is no longer a room. It's a language. A moment ago the kingdom spoke in ink, now it will speak in fire. Stand at the threshold a breath longer and look at how the feast is built. The hall has been measured the way a general measures a field. The candles are not merely numerous, they are placed. The ones nearest the high table burn the tallest. Draw the eye first, and throw a flattering geometry over the crown. Farther down the boards, the flames become shorter, mottled, and a shade more mortal. Light here is a map of proximity, an illuminated diagram of who is expected to glow and who is expected to reflect. The seating speaks even before anyone sits. Rank is a line, and the line curls tightest around the king. To the right hand goes precedence, to the left hand goes certainty. Both are calculated. A single seat shifted by 2 places does what a letter could not do. In a month it rewrites a relationship. See how one baron's chair is nudged toward the centre? That is a border being moved in public, by inches, under everyone's nose. Note the merchant placed within speaking distance of older families. A forthcoming loan disguised as hospitality. Everyone reads the table, everyone knows they're being read. The entrance is a ceremony of its own. Guests do not arrive, they are presented. The pace is slow enough to be counted, quick enough to feel inevitable. Even the distance from door to chair is measured, so that greetings have time to form and die without clinging to the air. Look at the servers forming a corridor of linen and intent. Their steps are the hall's metronome. They teach the eye what rhythm to expect, and expectation is half of obedience. If you could peel back the drapery of spectacle, you'd find a scaffolding of logistics. The steward who knows that 6 more benches arrived at dawn, the carver who rehearsed how to divide a boar so that no slice looks resentful, the usher who memorized the widths of sleeves so he can predict where goblets might spill. But we do not peel it back. We let the scaffolding be invisible, because invisibility is the first miracle of power, that it works without asking for attention, and yet nothing in the architecture is neutral. A balcony is not a balcony. It is a gallery of witnesses. The hearth is not only for warmth, it is a stage lamp. The dais is a kind of verdict, a ruling silent but legible on the relative importance of everyone present. The hall asks the guests to see themselves as pieces in a story already underway, and good guests comply because the story is flattering. They are not just eating, they are appearing. When the king arrives, he doesn't so much sit as settle the room. The murmurs pull tight like a drawstring. A new alignment flows from his chair outward first into the posture of the nearest lords, then into the hands of the servers, then into the faces of men who have not been in favour for months and are suddenly unsure if the season has changed. Architecture has done its work. It has gathered gravity in one place so that policy can begin to orbit without looking like it's moving at all. Now let the feast speak in its second alphabet, food and sound. The menu is curated to tell a sequence of truths, the way a liturgy tells a creed. The first course walks in like reassurance. Bread arrives first, bread always does. It is continuity sliced into portions, a quiet oath that the kingdom still knows its simplest task. Salt follows, a modest glitter, a covenant. The old farmers in the back rows see the salt and recognize the pact under all this silk. Then the hall inhales as the roasts appear boar, venison, goose, peacock in a train of impossible blues. Meat is history and jurisdiction. It declares what forests belong to whom. When a tusk curved like a question mark rests on the board, it announces that the crown still writes the answers. The carving is choreography. To watch it is to watch the transformation of force into share of domination into digestibility. A good carver is a diplomat with a blade. He can make plenty look like abundance and scarcity look like prudence. Between the meats come the wines deep, bright, aspirational. Each cup is a citation, a reference to the distances the crown can command. That red with a whisper of plum, it travelled farther than some barons have. That white that tastes like a cool stone in a river, it proves that someone has the king's ear in a port you've never seen. The goblet tilts, and a geography pause. The sweet course is proof of reach. Sugar does not lie. It tells you where ships have been and how many hands were paid to carry sweetness this far inland. Almond paste cities rise in miniature and vanish one bite at a time. Candied peel glows like small, tame suns. Honey remembers summer and loans it to winter evenings. At the sweet course, policy loosens its collar. Men who argued with eyebrows over the roasts now agree with chins over confection. All the while, the musicians stitch the hall together. The opening pavane steadies the pulse. The following estampi brightens the gaze. A motet lifts the roof just enough to let the smoke think it's a cloud. Music is the hall's temperature control. Too much minor, and men think of debts. Too much major, and men make promises the treasury cannot keep. The master of revels knows this, and he tunes not just lutes but moods. He knows when to send a soloist under a conversation that needs privacy, and when to command a chorus to drown a name that should not rebound off stone. Sometimes the music quotes policy. A hymn after the grace is no accident. Its text is a memo. Its harmonies a vote the room takes without raising hands. A drum at the door when a messenger slips in is a velvet distraction for bad news. A fanfare that's one trumpet too many is a reminder that the army is listening, that the armory can count. If anyone should forget that this is more than dinner, the melody remembers on their behalf. All senses are enlisted. Scent persuades as surely as speech. The citrus tucked in garlands, the cloves pricked into oranges like a map of tiny fortresses. The cinnamon breath that follows the servers as if they were comets. These are arguments delivered to the animal mind. Comfort is consent's easiest alibi. If the body settles, the will often follows, and policy feels like a reasonable extension of dessert. Now the hall changes key. The course is slow. A pocket of silence is made in the centre of the noise, and into that pocket the gifts arrive. A bracelet is not only a bracelet, it is a permission that will be exercised later without ink. When the king slips on a wrist, he is shaking hands with tomorrow's decision. A length of brocade is not decor, it is a vote stitched into silk, draped over a shoulder that will be turned toward the right side at the right moment. A ring is a signature on a document that will never be drafted. The names of such documents are known in the hall. Indulgence, license, exception, understanding. Watch the faces when a parcel of land is murmured into being. 3 fields and a woodlot become someone's new avenue of certainty. A map redraws itself without quill or table. When a wardship is granted, a childhood becomes a policy path. The mother sees not just the stipend, she sees the river of introductions that the stipend unlocks. Courtiers pretend that their forks are fascinating, while their hearts count future cousins. Favour has grammar. A gift delivered publicly is a decree. A gift delivered quietly is a whisper laid aside for later. John is bilingual. He can speak decree to the room and whisper to the man without changing the temperature of the wine. In one moment, he smiles so the herald will have something to say in the courtyard tomorrow. In the next, he lowers his voice so that a steward will tell a steward that the king remembers, which is often the largest gift of all. The recipients understand the pricing. They know that gratitude is not the currency. Usefulness is. Some will hurry to redeem the contract. Others will hold the token against a winter that hasn't yet announced itself. A few will misread the terms and think they have been loved. The wise understand they have been hired. Not all gifts travel outward. Some gifts return inward jewels back into the royal coffer via apology. A casket of coin left in a chapel anonymously precise. A captain might bring a hawk that hunts like a prayer. A merchant an answer to a question the king hasn't asked in public. Gifts form bridges where letters would sink. They curve over the water of suspicion and let men cross without getting wet. And then there are the negative gifts, the things withheld, an invitation not sent, a seat left empty beside the fire where a rival's cousin might have found it, a title that hovers like a bird and lands on a quieter branch at the last second. Absence is the costliest ribbon in the room. Everyone sees it. No one speaks it, and the person it belongs to will feel it in their bones all winter. The herald, when he finally clears his throat, names only the gifts the room is allowed to understand. The rest go home inside other people's bodies. A look that will be redeemed in council, a phrase that will be cashed at a gate, a nod that will walk straight into a vote like a man with a key to a door he did not pay for. By the end, the feast has spoken so clearly that hardly anyone remembers a speech. The hall has said, in sentences made of light and sugar and sound, exactly what the king needed said. We are plentiful, we are strong, we can afford to be generous, which is the only generosity that counts, but the message is intended for more than the guests. It will travel to the barons. The feast means capacity. It is a reminder that the chest may wheeze but can still sing, that the army can still march in step with the kitchen when called. It is also a warning disguised as comfort. If the king can produce this much abundance in a week, imagine what he can produce in a month of attention focused on your lands. If you are considering restlessness, consider the brightness of these candles and how easily they could be carried to another hall. To the merchants, the feast is signal, the citrus on the garlands, the pepper glittering like night on meat, the glassware that needed careful hands each is a trade route made edible. They see their own ledgers adjusting around the edges. interest quickening in cities that pronounce their names with unfamiliar vowels. They note which noble laughed at the wine from such and such a coast, and begin to calculate a ship's calendar. To the churchman, the feast is a text that begs a glosses. They will decide how to preach it, whether to square it with the season, whether to remind the room that the poor have tables too, whether to praise the king's bounty as the overflow of a just order, or to sigh pointedly at the weight of unnecessary sugar in Lenten minds. They, too, understand message. The anthem chosen, the alms distributed at the door, the way the king's hand lingered on the shoulder of a prior whose opinion matters in a chapter house a day's ride from here, and to the cities and villages listening at second hand. The feast is a rumour that comforts and ruffles at once. Comfort. The crown still glitters, and glitter is a kind of roof against winter. Ruffle. Glitter must be paid for. And payment has a way of finding the road that runs nearest your door. In alehouses, men will repeat the part of the feast that is delicious. In kitchens, women will repeat the part that is useful, which faces were seen facing, which faces, which names left before the sweet course, which doors were held for which coats. By market day, the feast will have turned into a weather report for the soul of the realm. It is tempting to believe that the message declines with the candles. It does not. It congeals overnight into memory and plan. The steward writes 3 names in a column headed Approach. The treasurer writes 2 figures under Possible. The chaplain writes a verse in a margin and circles 1 word twice. A baron writes nothing, but his squire observes him take out a map after midnight and stare at a river crossing until the moon gets bored. Before we leave, listen 1 more time to the room itself. The boards are sticky with good intentions. The cups ring faintly as they cool. The last notes of the minstrel hang like thread someone forgot to cut. The feast is over, but the policy it has declared will spend the week walking under other names. What was poured here will be collected out there in rents, in loyalties, in silences. Back in the small chamber, the king's work table waits. The seal authority, the ledger reality, the goblet still fizzing performance, the half-open music mood. The hall has done its work. These will do the rest. We close the door gently, because doors, too, are instruments. A slammed door says the king is angry. A soft door says the king has decided. Breathe in and out. We have watched a kingdom say, we are enough without using the words. Next, we will follow the assertion into the places where it has to be true. The counting rooms, the quiet interviews, the corridors that lead to rooms where men agree to be persuaded. The music in the great hall thins, not ending so much as stepping back to catch its breath. Candles gutter and steady. Servers begin their elegant retreat linen folded like swans. Trays emptied of their arguments. The door we choose now is smaller, padded at the frame to keep sound obedient. The corridor behind it smells less of clove and more of beeswax and ink. This is where abundance takes off its public jewellery and becomes arrangement. If the feast hold the room, we are enough. The rooms we are entering tell a narrower circle. Here is how enough is distributed. The first sign that we have crossed a threshold is how quickly voices learn to curve. Nothing here is said in straight lines. Greetings are angled to include and exclude at once. The second sign is how the pace changes. Slower steps, quicker glances. And the third sign, a small one, but decisive, is that a page carrying a covered box will be allowed to pass before a man carrying a covered opinion. Gifts travel first, thoughts travel escorted. Selection begins long before anyone names it. A person does not become visible in these rooms all at once. They acquire a border. It starts at the edges. Someone who always seems to be at the right angle to the candlelight. Someone to whom a server speaks half a beat more carefully. An introduction is offered that is only partly about names. It is mostly about placement, who is standing behind whom, whose shoulder frames, whose smile. A conversation opens with a memory of the feast and closes with the exchange of something that is not quite a promise and not merely courtesy. What passes between hands may be small a token, a seal imprint, a ribbon with no colour the court is permitted to name aloud, but it is freighted with a later. The king does not conduct auditions, he conducts experiments. A few are invited to the morning when the ledgers are read, a few to the evening when the anthem is chosen. A few to a hunt announced too late for anyone to attend, unless they had already been told. Each invitation is a test. Punctuality is competence, that discretion is oxygen. The ability to understand a sentence with two meanings is foundation. Those who pass do not merely advance, they rearrange the furniture around them without touching it. The door that was heavy yesterday opens politely today. Gifts are the alphabet of this language, but their grammar is subtle, a book of hours. With a leaf left blank is a page reserved for a future name. A brocade cut long enough to edge a mantle and short enough to require a tailor says, "You will need help, and here is the tailor." A signet pressed into a palm for one night only is the right to make a small decision as if one were the king himself, with the understanding that the decision will be invisible and the right will be remembered at a later crossroads. These are not bribes, they are bridges. People cross them toward duties they will someday pretend were inevitable. If the selection is a sifting, the elevation is a tilt. The angle at which others look at a person changes, and with it the temperature of the corridor they enter. The capella master nods first, the steward nods second, the man who never nods last. A favour delivered in a whisper at the close of compline is paid not in coin, but in position, and position is the only currency that appreciates after midnight. Somewhere a lamp is turned for this person, somewhere a chair is moved half a foot nearer heat. Somewhere a correction that would have been delivered in public is softened into a suggestion with witnesses removed. These are the steps on a staircase no one admits exists. Information is the current that carries all of it. It moves through the back rooms with a politeness that is almost shy. The after of any formal moment is where the sentence completes itself. Here the steward repeats a tally in a different order, and the order is the message. Here a singer warms a phrase that will be sung tomorrow in the chapel on a word chosen tonight. Here a hand that has never signed anything places a blank slip on a desk, and by morning the desk will have decided what the slip should have said. The public door generates applause, the private door generates alignment. Taste develops like law. The king's eye becomes the hinge on which fashion swings, and the hinge squeaks just enough for the court to hear it. A narrow cuff becomes correct and then obvious and then necessary. A scent that behaved like a rumour in spring becomes a standard by summer. If you wear it in winter, you are unseasonable in ways that have nothing to do with weather. The cut of a collar says more about a person's playlist of rooms than their neck. Jewels travel not to look pretty, but to look legible. A cluster suggests proximity. A single stone suggests focus. A matte finish suggests a confidence that does not need polish to shine. Masks are not worn only at festivals. A veil is a statement about how far a conversation intends to go. A half mask at a minor celebration says, "Do not attribute this opinion to me. Attribute it to the room." A glove left on a balustrade is an invitation to a walk that will decide a week. 2 gloves left is either a mistake or a declaration that someone no longer wishes to be read accurately. Even shoes speak quietly. The length of the toe becomes a time signature. People wearing this length will arrive before the bell. That length will arrive after. For reasons they consider strategic, perfume and powders are arranged like arguments. Too much clove, and one is accused of attempting to smell like a treasury. Too much rose, and one is suspected of trying to smell like an apology. A note of resin on a person who is not in the chapel suggests the chapel came to them. A trace of citrus, where citrus is hard to obtain, implies a route to the harbour, or to someone who considers the harbour a conversation, not a place. The nose learns politics. It files reports that the mouth cannot deliver without losing the room. The court adopts the king's palette, because palettes are safer than policies. To share colour is to fail to disagree. Silk becomes map, and the bodies that carry it become banners that read themselves. A man whose cloak hems echo the king's will be forgiven for saying something the king did not mean to hear. A woman whose brooch repeats the angle of a royal device will be offered the chance to change her mind before she quite has one. The aesthetic stabilizes the ethical without being asked to. It draws lines that laws will later trace with ink. With elevation comes shadow. The rise is a narrow staircase with room for only one pair of feet at a time, and those behind measure the cadence of the person ahead, like musicians who know exactly when the audience claps wrong. The newly favoured learn quickly the difference between being seen and being noticed. Being seen makes you a landmark. Being noticed makes you a path. Paths are walked. Landmarks are pointed at. The wise try to be the second until they understand how to be the first without getting rained on. Jealousy is too loud for these rooms. Envy is the more accurate word because it has better manners. It moves sideways, registers itself with a barely visible adjustment of sleeve, a smile that lingers on a syllable that did not require it. Envy understands timing. The best moment to discuss a misstep is just after a blessing. When blessings make people generous but nervous, it does not accuse, it suggests, and suggestions are the court's favourite tool. They leave fingerprints that look like someone else's. Factions don't declare themselves, they form like frost on a window, beautiful and specific to the temperature of the night. One cluster prefers a certain tempo of decision. Another prefers to rehearse the decision until the decision becomes memory. A third cluster consists of people who dislike the other two clusters, but dislike each other just enough to be useful. They meet under the banner of adjustment, never opposition. Their hobby is editing. They will not say a policy is wrong. They will say it is asymmetrical, and then spend the afternoon with a ruler. The economy of favour produces its own derivatives. A kindness offered to a friend of a friend appreciates into a call that can be exercised when the room is crowded and the king is not looking for a new friend. A glance becomes a warrant when carried by the right steward. A moment of laughter at the wrong time devalues a month of dutiful silence. Everyone invests, everyone hedges. Reputation is the market. Attention is the volatility index. The only thing that secures value is usefulness, and usefulness must be renewed. In a setting obsessed with smoothness, the moral jolt arrives like a draft under a door. It is not a crisis at first, it is a cold. A sermon sharpens itself more than usual. A chronicler writes a line that feels like the top edge of a blade. A baron's wife pauses over a phrase that would have completed itself easily yesterday. Questions are not shouted. They are held between two fingers to see how much they weigh. Do these gifts mean debt? Does this nearness mean consent? Does this policy smell of incense because it is holy, or because it passed by the chapel on its way to the treasury? The church knows how to press a bruise without breaking skin. A letter arrives that is not a reprimand but reads like a mirror. It reminds the court that charity performed loudly is a quiet mispronunciation of charity. It suggests that abundance is safest when it behaves as if it were already counted out for others. The letter is read in a room that would prefer not to be reading it. The silence afterward is not agreement, but it is attention. Attention is the only doorway through which correction can enter without knocking over the furniture. The nobility have their own choreography of disapproval. They do not refuse invitations, they accept them differently. They arrive on time when they used to arrive early. They leave politely when they used to linger. A gift that would have produced a bow produces a salute of exactly equal length, but a different angle. The owner of the angle knows it. The king's steward knows it. By week's end, the angle has been diagrammed in 3 households and written into nobody's paper. This is how a class explains itself while pretending it is merely tired. A court that has been accused of overindulgence does not deny it. It rehearses an apology. The apology is a rite. Alms are distributed at a time when eyes are awake to see them. A fast is observed with such elegant strictness that it looks accidental. A procession is made from the hall to the chapel like a river relearning its course. The singers sing something with more spare intervals than usual. The chaplain chooses a text that rests on words like temperance and measure, though he never says the words themselves. The king's hand rests on a shoulder it has not rested on in months. It is less a statement than a temperature change. What follows is not reform, it is reframing. Feast thin, slightly still abundant, but with edges that read as discipline. Gifts are not smaller, but their envelopes carry more handwriting. Announcements are made by fewer trumpets with better intonation. The court discovers that it can be as beautiful in daylight as at night, and discovers reluctantly that daylight has its uses. The same tapestries look new when viewed as history rather than decor. The same musicians become more intriguing when one hears the training rather than the cleverness, and yet the river returns to its bed. The court's preference is not for hunger or for sermons. It is for fluency. After the rite, conversation resumes at lower volume and higher skill. Those who had been offended have been offered places to stand from which offence is no longer the only thing to see. Those who had been careless have been handed tools with which care becomes less boring. The court moves on not because it has changed its mind, but because it never liked being stationary. We return, for a moment, to the small evidences that hold the whole machine together, a note written in a hand that is famously hard to read, placed where it will be found by someone who is famously good at reading it, a cloak adjusted by 1/2 an inch so the pin on its shoulder points toward a door that was closed to that person last month, a song ordered for vespers that is known to turn the mind toward patience and away from quarrel. None of these is proof that the court is wise. All of them are proof that the court knows how to behave. Selection has done its work, taste has drawn its map, favour has produced its mathematics, conscience has tapped the glass and been heard. What remains is the ongoing exchange, the back and forth by which a king maintains a climate, and a climate produces the weather the king prefers. It is not accident that the goblet on the king's work table is still fizzing, that the ledger is still open, that the seal remains warm, that the music on the stand waits at a page with no rests. Performance, reality, authority, mood. The instruments do not pack themselves away. As night stretches thin, the rooms grow lighter. In another sense, the load of them eases. People remove the day from their faces and reveal the work. A letter drawn up to sound like it was not drawn up. A route plotted that appears to have been discovered accidentally. A kindness scheduled to be delivered by someone who will be thanked more than he deserves. There is no villain here to hiss at, no saint to crown. There is only a system that resembles a person and a person who resembles a system. Power is tasteful because taste is power's most obedient servant. Exchange is polite because politeness moves faster than force. Preference becomes rule because rules take too long to write. If you listen from the corridor as the last doors close, you'll hear the gentle percussion of 1,000 soft decisions, gloves picked up, rings removed, buckles undone, pages turned. You will hear a whisper that might be a prayer and might be a plan. You will hear the sound of someone walking back to a room they did not have a year ago, already rehearsing what to do with the room tomorrow. And you will hear this, most faintly, the quiet of a king who, for one long breath, believes the music will start in tune again in the morning because he has arranged it to. The arrangement holds until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, the same corridors will carry different news. But that is another passage. For tonight, we have seen how proximity is purchased, how style becomes statute, how favour writes its unwritten law, and how conscience knocks just loudly enough to be let in without spoiling the dinner. The hall taught us to read light and sugar. These rooms have taught us to read texture and air. Both alphabets say the same thing in different scripts. Power prefers to whisper, and it prefers to be overheard. The rooms grow quieter as the night lengthens. Not empty, never empty, but careful. Footsteps thin out to singles and pairs. The lamps burn lower, as if someone had turned the flame down with 2 fingers and a thought. This is the hour when a court reveals its second profession. By day it entertains, by evening it bargains. By late night it remembers that order is a garden and gardens don't keep themselves. The first clue is the way doors begin to behave. Some close as usual, others close with a softness that asks you to forget you heard them. The corridor learns a new rhythm, not the proud stride of men who have just been seen, but the measured pace of those who intend not to be. A page carries nothing now, and because he carries nothing, he can carry everything. A message, a nod, a route. The stillness is not absence, it is supervision settling into its chair. Supervision here is not the cartoon of a glowering face. It is a collection of small, perfected techniques. A man is asked to remain in a room until morning, and the room happens to have no window. Another is invited to read a letter in the presence of someone who writes very fine hand and very poor jokes. A third is told he will be needed elsewhere for a time, and when he asked where, the answer is where you will be useful, which is a place without a map. No one is struck, the furniture remains innocent. Yet by dawn the lines on a dozen foreheads have been rearranged, and the kingdom makes a new kind of sense. Short confinements are the court's punctuation. They pause a sentence that was galloping away. They turn an exclamation into a comma and a boast into a footnote. A day here, 2 nights there, enough to teach the skin how the air tastes when a latch decides your schedule. The point is not misery. The point is measurement, how long a person takes to understand that time can be borrowed against them and that repayment is expected in the exact currency of cooperation. When they are returned to their desks, the ink seems thicker, the quills sharper, the margin narrower. They write more beautifully afterwards. Beauty is the byproduct of attention. Interviews. Another instrument are conducted at a table that is neither friendly nor unfriendly. The questions are clean, with edges you could shave on. When did you learn? Whom did you tell? What did you mean by doing well? The room is arranged to make the truth feel like the easier furniture to sit on. There is no shouting. The voice that carries the questions is the voice of a man who never misplaces a key and never raises it above the lock. Sometimes the interview ends with thanks, a brief smile, and a change in title that seems modest until one notices the doors it no longer opens. Reassignment is the most elegant of corrections. A clerk becomes a courier, a captain becomes a quartermaster. A familiar staircase leads to a different landing. The pay remains respectable, the rooms do not sulk. The portrait on the wall continues to resemble the person it resembles. But the angle of a life has shifted by a few degrees, and that angle will, given months, make a strong argument about loyalty and the direction it prefers to travel, where force would have made an enemy. Arrangement makes a lesson. Every court has a rumour about a room where matters are settled more sharply. Ours prefers not to say the room's name. It prefers to say that the room exists, which is often all a room like that needs to do. Its reputation walks faster than any guard. It passes through the great hall at breakfast and sits down beside people who are not invited to dine with it. The room teaches without appearing, which is the style of all the most patient teachers. Prisons in this kingdom wear two faces. One face is turned inward, toward those who know where they are and why. The other face turns outward, toward those who need to guess. Inwardly, a cell is an arrangement of stone and air that encourages accurate thinking. Outwardly, it is a stage in an empty theatre. The audience hears about it, imagines the scenery, and applauds the conclusion without seeing the play. Bars are not merely bars. They are lines of text written for anyone considering a paragraph that would displease the crown. Corridors do not merely chill, they underline. A messenger who walks past the gate too slowly becomes commentary. A lantern held an inch higher than usual becomes citation. A door that opens twice and closes once becomes footnote. The story writes itself in silhouettes, and silhouettes do not need detail to be understood. What reaches the market the next morning is not an inventory of suffering. It is a diagram of consequence. People go about their business with greater precision. They put their names where their names belong. They withdraw their hands a fraction sooner from fires that did not need them. Chronicles, according to the way they were kept, mention episodes that stand in for many. One entry will note that a man who had been insolent in winter found his thoughts much improved by midsummer. Another that a debt long discussed was repaid after a pleasant retreat near the coast where the air was bracing and the conversation exact. Letters between officials suggest that provisions have been made for the comfort of an individual who will not, for a time, be attending council. Folklore will turn these hints into louder shapes, doors made of iron that cough, walls that listen. Satire will rearrange the facts until they rhyme. But the administrative record prefers courtesy. It says enough to preserve the idea, and stops before the picture forms too clearly. Among the recurring accusations, again, according to sources, are those of withholding as instruction. A man is granted less warmth than he expected and learns how quickly truth can heat a room. A committee tastes the flavour of absence when a certain chair remains empty until the minutes become precise. There are stories of meals missed that turn into memories with excellent recall. One does not forget the taste of a night where bread had a price called explanation. There are stories of garments exchanged for garments more suitable to rooms with fewer colours. No one tells these stories with relish. They tell them with point, as if holding a quill upright for the young to see. Public humiliation, the chronicles imply, is rare, and when it occurs it wears the clothing of example, not appetite. A man who boasted in the wrong key finds himself singing alone in a courtyard where the echo is temperate but definite. A title abated by a fraction becomes a lesson in arithmetic. A horse is kept ready for a journey that does not begin. And because it does not begin, a rumour completes it, which is better than a journey for the court's purposes. Sharpness remains in the scabbard. The idea of sharpness attends every meeting. The effect on machinery is immediate and, for a time, perfect. Fear in this register does not make hands shake. It makes them steady. People arrive on the beat. They read not merely the words, but the habit under the words. They love the God of small accuracy, and he blesses them with advancement. The problem with fear is not its efficiency, it is its appetite. It asks for a little more space every week, and people who are very good at giving space are also very good at believing they meant to. The courtiers adjust their faces. The first expression to go is surprise. Surprise is dangerous in a room that prefers rehearsed outcomes. In its place, they cultivate interest, which is safer and more nutritious. They learn the diet of the king's patience. They don't indulge in candour unless it can be plated properly. They develop a fluency in the language of delay, a compliment that buys an hour, a question that buys a corridor, a minor confession wrapped around a major request. When they praise the instrument rather than the player, because instruments are less likely to remember that you praise them poorly. Flattery ripens in the shadow of suspicion. It begins with admiration and ends with agreement. At first it is a garnish. No one arranges a council like this. Soon it is a sauce. You have taught us to prefer clarity over comfort. Eventually it is the meal. We were wrong to want what we wanted. We want what you want now. This is not hypocrisy, it is athletics. People learn to stretch the muscles that keep their heads attached to their shoulders. Those who stretch best become instructors. Those who stretch badly become examples. Somewhere in the middle lives the average man, who practices before the mirror and resolves to make one fewer joke each season. But the loop tightens. A court governed by care begins to fall in love with carefulness, which is not the same thing. Decisions that need courage are dressed in caution so that the tailor can admire his work. Documents pass through hands so clean that the ink forgets it was ink and begins to consider itself perfume. Men who are bold at breakfast are prudent by supper. Prudence, if left unsupervised, will invert the ladder. The brave seem reckless, the clever seem disloyal, the quiet seem wise because no one can prove what they would have said if invited to speak. A kingdom cannot live forever in the hushed chamber. It must sometimes cross the courtyard and say something loud in weather. Yet loudness is difficult for ears trained to prefer velvet. Requests that should be demands wander into the world in their nightshirts and catch cold. Opportunities, when they knock, are asked to leave a message. The treasury notices. Coin that would have been earned by asking in time must now be purchased at a premium by pleading late. The army notices. A march that would have advanced confidence instead measures obedience and finds it exact but narrow. Meanwhile, the prisons continue to do their work as theatres. A man who knows almost nothing about them knows everything he needs to. That they are there, that they are possible, that they do not require hatred to function. Hate is extravagant. The kingdom cannot always afford it. What it can afford is calm, the kind of calm that sits with a ledger and decides that this page must be balanced and this name will help balance it. Calm, in administrative hands, is indistinguishable from fate. In the chronicles again, by the way they were kept, one sees a pattern. Trouble is followed by arrangement, arrangement by stillness, stillness by inaction, inaction by correction, correction by a new trouble that looks suspiciously like the old trouble wearing a more recent cloak. Some entries hint at a withering, vigour that does not find its hour, counsel that arrives dressed for yesterday, talent that spends its mornings rehearsing how not to offend instead of inventing how to win. The scribe does not say fear did this. He writes that custom prevailed. A reader who has lived in rooms knows exactly which custom. And then there is betrayal. The court's last line in a script it thinks it knows by heart. Betrayal here is rarely theatrical. It is the quiet arithmetic of men who have practiced addition so long they forget subtraction exists. A favour offered to a safer prince, a letter shaded toward an older friend, a door left on the latch for a visitor who is not expected and therefore very welcome. This is not romance, it is frictionless physics. People slide toward warmth. If you teach them that warmth is adjacent to power rather than attached to right, they will adjust their compasses accordingly. If there is a solution, it is unfashionable. Trust, which must be given before it is deserved, and watched as if it were a candle in a draught. Trust cannot be policed into being, it can only be hosted, every once in a while, and always at great risk. A king must step out of the chamber where fear keeps the furniture polished and speak into the hall where mistakes keep the air alive. Men who have been supervised will flinch. Men who have been flattered will blush. Men who have been careful will look at their shoes and wonder if they have learned the wrong dance. And then, if the invitation is true, they will remember how to be useful without being afraid. For tonight, we leave the chamber with its clean questions and its polite doors. The corridor's cooler but no longer cold. Somewhere a latch lifts because it is time. And time, unlike fear, does not negotiate. It moves. The king's work table waits as ever, the seal cooling to its chip, the ledger half closed like a mouth that has said enough. The goblet quiet at last, the music still open at a page that promises a better key if the choir will dare it. The court breathes, not deeply, not yet, but it breathes, and breathing, if it learns the habit, will eventually permit a voice. The night has thinned to a paler shade, that moment when candles stop pretending to be stars and settle for being flames. In the counting rooms the air is cooler, less perfumed, tinged with iron and vellum. Here, pleasure keeps its accounts. The voices are lower, but not fewer. Numbers make a kind of conversation all their own. If the feast declared, we are enough. This is where the declaration is itemized line by line until belief meets arithmetic. The first instrument is simple and relentless. The levy that becomes a habit, a new impost on wool to keep ships fed, a surcharge on wine to keep lutes tuned, a temporary aid to ferry confidence across the channel where the war is always almost won. Temporary. Like winter, a toll at the bridge, rebaptized as maintenance, a key fee that walks ashore and never quite leaves. Each is small enough to slip under the door alone, but together they swell the corridor. A clever clerk writes the schedule in crisp, comforting hands. A cleverer steward announces that nothing has been raised, only harmonized, regularized, brought into alignment with the king's needs, which is a phrase with a good tailor. Collecting is choreography. Sheriffs take their cues from letters, reeves from sheriffs, beadles from reeves. And so the music of obligation travels outward through market towns and manors. Men who once counted their year by ploughing and harvest now count it by the day of payment and the day of payment's cousin. Someone new stands at the gate of the mill. Someone with a scale stands near the sacks. Someone with a slate stands where slates had not stood before. A parish fits another box for coin beside the poor box and wonders which box charity prefers. No one shouts. Shouting is expensive. The crown prefers to charge softly and often. Reactions ripple exactly as you would expect and precisely as the treasurer predicts. The merchant says yes first because he knows how to pass a cost on with a smile. The townsman says yes with a list of conditions that look like compliments until the commas are counted. The villager says yes with his shoulders, which have learned to shrug in a way that does not offend anybody important. The baron says yes if the war is going well and no if the glossy rumours have turned matter. The abbot says yes in Latin and no in bread. And under all these yeses and nos there is the same arithmetic whisper. What will break first, the habit or the purse? The second instrument is older than the king and cleverer than promises. Pledge what glitters, borrow what breathes. A crown is a symbol until it visits the goldsmith at dusk and becomes collateral. Jewels, heavy as certain truths, travel in discreet bundles with men who do not wear livery but know how to bow. A necklace the court admired last month becomes an entry in a ledger in a room that has no music. The ring that sealed 10 charters spends a season sleeping in a chest that also holds other people's necessity. Nothing is sold, heaven forfend. It is simply pledged, and pledged again, until pledge begins to sound a lot like promise to someone else if we are late. Moneylenders, practical saints of the anxious hour, arrive with their own liturgy. They count without looking impressed. They are polite to seals and fonder of signatures. Their rooms smell of wax and iron keys. They speak in maturities and margins. in quiet requests for assurances that will be loudly enforced if ever ignored. The court dispatches its most courteous wolves to negotiate. A schedule is drawn, this much by Michaelmas, this much at Candlemas, this much whenever ships agree to forgive the weather. The treasury inhales on credit and exhales into the future. The kingdom breathes, and the future grows a little tighter around the ribs. Meanwhile, lesser glitter is gathered in tidy handfuls. A reliquary on long loan to a priory returns home to visit the mother house and finds itself measured for a different casing. Silver plates go to ground, then reappear as coin that carries the same story with less ceremony. Even the royal wardrobe learns to speak accounting. Brocades move from shoulders to sureties. Furs stand as guarantors for campaigns that do not care how warm your collar is. Dignity is carefully preserved in language, which is the cloth you can always cut again. The exchequer tables come alive. Tally sticks ashwood notch like secrets are married and broken. Each fracture and agreement sealed and remembered. The black cloth is spread over the checkered board. Counters slide, auditors sing their dry antiphons. Received, owed, remitted, allowed. It is beautiful in a way only exactness can be. And still, over all this neatness, the treasury wheezes, not from incompetence, from appetite. Music costs what it costs. Ships cost what seas demand. Silence is never on sale. Even prudence, that thrifty angel, must occasionally be bribed to stay the night. There are expenses the record enjoys listing: timbers, harness, salt for garrisons, fees for messengers whose horses surely ate twice the oats they were paid for. And there are expenses the record learns to spell with a blush. The fee stood for policy, now policy stands for payment. Gifts that were bridges become toll roads toward a vote. A customary gratuity to the man whose brother commands the harbour is entered under hospitality, which is a long pocket with many coins at the sewn-in bottom. The stipend for a singer who will sing the right refrain at chapter is filed under the uplifting rubric of devotion. The steward who keeps an ear pressed to the keyhole of mood is paid in veils of miscellaneous. The total at the end of the column is accurate in the way a portrait is accurate when it flatters the chin. The treasurer's headache is rhythmic. He knows what the kingdom spends when the kingdom is brave, when the kingdom is hungry, when the kingdom's embarrassed. He knows the price of smoothing a quarrel, 1 gift and 2 letters if done before sunset. 3 gifts, 3 letters, and an apology no one will believe if left for morning. He knows how much it takes to turn a rumour into an anecdote, and how much more to prevent it from becoming a proverb. He can recite, without looking at the page, the rate at which generosity decays into expectation and expectation into law. He has learned the mathematics of shame, the premium paid for not admitting an error in public, and the mathematics of pride, the surcharge added, when someone important must be seen to have been right all along. What never fits tidily onto vellum are the Dan accept, the arrangements, the accommodations, the agreements that happen in the chamber next to the spreadsheet. A widow's dower adjusted by a kindness that expects its own memory later. A barge loaded with lumber but counted as fish because the inspector has an allergy to splinters. A winter retainer extended into spring for a captain whose loyalty always blooms with the hawthorn. These are not crimes. Not exactly. They are lubricants. Machines that grind without oil do not last. And courts are most certainly machines. Crown debt becomes a weather report. On wet days, courtiers say the king is invested in the future. On dry days, they say circulation is tight. Merchants say the court is good for it, because the court must be good for it. Nobody wants to be the first to discover the contrary. The lending houses mark a page with a tiny device no larger than a fly's wing. That means, in their very private language, watch. Servants in the wardrobe notice that the ordering of silk is called staggered this season. Cooks notice that a feast asks for fewer imported inventions and more local genius. Falconers notice that the birds are flown on days when the court needs to be seen loving the outdoors rather than what it owes. Outside the palace, costs propagate like ripples from a stone you did not see thrown. A vintner who paid the new duty charges a fraction more for every cup, and the fraction finds its way into a baker's morning arithmetic. The baker keeps the loaves the same size, but changes the weight of the air inside them. No one quite complains. Everyone uses more carefully the words that would have been complaints last year. A guild meets to decide that quality will be maintained, and by quality they mean dignity, and by dignity they mean prices must not shame them. In the countryside, a reeve explains a new tally to men who understand tallies very well. They nod at the right places and then find the one corner of their lives where the tally will not apply, if only to prove they are not altogether furniture. Nobles feel the tug in the embroidery. A levy that eats the rent of a winter means an heir who will study diplomacy rather than hawking this year. A wardship priced like a small castle means a cousin will find his vocation in the church. Where vocations cost less up front, their households adjust posture. Letters become 2 paragraphs longer and a degree warmer toward people they had not imagined warming to. Promises are timed more precisely. Hospitality becomes a mathematics of candles and corridors. The table remains long, the salt remains bright, the harps do their best. But someone has calculated that laughter is cheapest when it is scheduled. Rumour loves economics because economics is rumour's favourite genre. It travels well, it wears any cloak, and it always contains at least a decimal of truth. In alehouses, men explain to each other the inner workings of the treasury as if they had eaten dinner with it. In markets, women correct them with prices, which are facts. The story of a pawned jewel becomes a necklace of tales, no 2 beads the same, all of them shining with the oil of someone's hope or grievance. A clever satirist in a corner copies the way the treasurer holds his quill and invents a stanza in which the quill holds the treasurer. It rhymes adequately and sells very well. Back inside, the king listens to totals read in a voice trained to keep the room from tilting. Some lines are pleasing, some are tolerable. Some demand the professional art of renaming. A fine becomes a recognition. A loan becomes an advance of affection. An arrear becomes a tradition valued by both parties that will shortly be honoured. The king is not fooled, but neither is he helpless. He can give back the appearance of solvency long enough for solvency to catch up. He can invite the merchants to a feast where he makes trading routes taste like custard and then suggests, very gently, that customs and courtesy will rise together and not feel the climb. He can offer the church a sermon, by way of the chaplain, that begins with providence and ends with exemplary modesty in a schedule of payments that make providence easier to recognize. The great advantage of ruling a memory is that memory can be convinced to share the load. The past, properly curated, vouches for the present. We have survived worse is a balm the body politic knows how to absorb. The treasurer prefers another phrasing, less pretty and more repeatable. We have scheduled worse. He means that time can be convinced to carry what coin cannot, provided time is divided into months with names that make debt look like seasons rather than mistakes. And so a calendar is hung beside the map, and the kingdom learns to watch both. As sailors watch wind and tide together, every feast leaves crumbs that must be swept into a column. Every sighing that comforted a baron last night becomes a sum this morning. Yet the court is not foolish. It understands the cost of not spending. A pleasure withheld at the wrong hour becomes a bitterness that charges interest. A silence not purchased in time becomes a sermon you cannot afford. Prudence and generosity are not enemies. They are wrestlers, and the crowned skill lies in letting each win on the nights the audience has paid to see that winner. There are moments when the room must admit that there is no cleverness left to be applied. A ship did not come. A harvest came poorly. A truce came expensively. Then the conversation grows very quiet. The king takes off a ring not a favourite, never a favourite, and places it on the table as if he were weighing a word. The treasurer nods. The clerk writes. The ring goes to visit those rooms with iron keys and patient faces. No one says the word pawned. They say the ring has entered service, and everyone is relieved to discover that rings, unlike people, do not require bread. We could, if we wished, list every line that makes the steward's pen sigh. We could name the largesse that keeps a baron's temper, the consideration that persuades a garrison to forgive a month's delay, the token that convinces a chronicler his ink is better used on hymns than invective. But lists are not what the knight wants. The knight wants the shape of the thing, how funds feed form, how form feeds faith. and how faith pays back funds with a loyalty that lasts just long enough to justify the next round. If you were to step out into the city at dawn, you would see the ledger walking around in the open, disguised as prices, bread with a new shyness, fish with a new boldness, candles that seem to have learned a longer song about how long they will burn. You would hear the word dear used not as affection but as arithmetic. You would see shutters open a fraction later and close a fraction sooner. Markets thrive, because markets are stubborn creatures, but they thrive in a different key. A kingdom that finances pleasure learns to price mood. It discovers that contentment has a cost, and discontent has three. It practices the art of buying time and learns the peril of renting trust. It makes the same old mistake, believing that a calendar can do anything a conscience can, then corrects itself with a festival in which conscience is flattered into feeling responsible for the relief that money purchased. No one is wholly fooled, everyone is partially comforted. That is how societies continue. By week's end, the gossip has matured into position. Barons calculate with sharpened abaci. Merchants schedule with sharper quills. Abbots sermonize with pauses where coin once clinked. In kitchens and courtyards, the talk is not of scandal, but of capacity, what the realm can carry and for how long, what it should put down and where, who will have strong enough arms to help. People who have never seen the treasury know exactly how large it is, because they have learned what it must be to keep promising what it promises. Back at the work table, the seal cools, its chip like a reminder that authority, too, takes dents when it leans too often. The ledger shuts with a sound that resembles relief. The goblet has finally stopped fizzing. The music page waits at a bar where the key changes, prepared to make the same melody sound braver or humbler depending on what the sum can bear. Outside, the courtyard blinks into morning. A cart creaks, a clerk stretches, a guard discovers he is hungry only when the bread appears. The realm is as solvent as it needs to be to reach noon, and noon has always been far enough for the early hours of a day. What spreads next is not panic, it is prudence, the kind that villagers understand and courtiers pretend they invented. Women at wells do the math better than men at tables. They know what a levy means when it has become a habit. They know how to trim a recipe so that appetite survives and dignity is fed. Men at ploughs do not love new tolls, but they love roofs that do not drip. And if the king can convince them that roofs and tolls are cousins, they will nod and carry one more load up the lane. The realm does not break, it adjusts, which is the more complicated courage. Of course there are grumblings. There always will be where coins and pride share walls. A story about a necklace that travelled too far becomes proof that the king loves glitter more than bread. A tale about a feast that used too many oranges becomes proof that the king loves the sea more than the field. These stories are kindling. Most nights they do not find a spark. Some nights the wind changes, and they do. That is what history is for, to remember which winds mattered and which were only breezes with good diction. For now, the numbers have done their modest miracle. They have given the court another week of confidence, another month of arrangements, another season of music that sounds like policy and policy that tastes like pastry. If you listen closely as the counting room empties, you can hear the ledger whisper the one prayer it knows. Let receipts meet promises. It is not a pious prayer, but it is practical, and practicality is the kingdom's oldest church. We step back into the corridor. The candles are fewer now. The light that remains has decided to be honest daylight. Somewhere a minstrel is practicing a softer tune that costs less to tune to. Somewhere a merchant counts in his head and smiles because the court has taught him how to count, without appearing to. Somewhere the king rubs at the place on his finger where a ring used to sit and tells himself he prefers the feel of skin. And the realm, having priced its pleasures for another chapter, walks out to meet its markets as if markets were weather and weather. Like pleasure, could be arranged. The morning markets wake earlier than the bells. Stalls unfold like careful fans. Baskets bloom with whatever the night didn't eat. The first copper clinks test the air. If the palace is where policy rehearses, the market is where memory performs. A woman selling onions carries as many stories as bulbs. A fishmonger flicks water from his hands and from a rumour at the same time. The day is practical in its needs bread. Salt, wool, but the day is also hungry for explanations. and explanations are cheapest when bought in conversation. Listen for the roots. A piece of news leaves the court in a cloak and arrives in the square wearing an apron. The first teller is often a man with nothing to sell but time. He begins with a detail polished enough to catch the ear. Did you know the king can tell a lie from the sound of the lock turning? A second teller adds warmth. He learned it in France, where locks sing differently. A third teller leans in with a compassion that implies proximity. My cousin keeps the keys. He says the locks prefer to sing for him. Already we have 3 versions and a spare. By noon the story has been salted with everyday proof. Someone saw a coach. Someone heard a name. Someone else found a reason to believe, because believing keeps the day interesting. The secrets travel a second road on Sundays. A priest climbs the pulpit, looks over a congregation that knows the taste of price and the sound of policy, and chooses whether to preach weather or warning. You might begin with a psalm and end with a parable that is not quite a parable about men who love feasts more than fields, or about candles that burn too high and forget the table beneath them. He hasn't mentioned the king. He doesn't need to. A good sermon is a mirror that finds a forehead whether or not a name has been said. The congregation leaves with scripture and with direction, and direction is what rumour likes best. A lane to run down. Between market and church there is the tavern, part office, part chorus. Tankards perform their own liturgy lift. Clink, murmur, and the room votes with its eyebrows. The first speaker sets the key, the second provides harmony, the third, who claims to have a friend in a kitchen that once served a man who once served a clerk, brings in the drums. A single incident, an arrest that took longer than usual to announce, a jewel that didn't return from its visit to the goldsmith as quickly as it should, splits into 10 versions, so deftly that even the original, if it walked in wearing its own face, would have to order 2 ales before it was permitted to speak. In the shadow of the churchyard wall stands another chorus. Children, they inherit the leftovers of adult talk and bake it into skipping songs. In their lyrics, the king rides a pig to council or counts coins on Sundays or marries spring to winter for a new tax. None of it needs to be true to be accurate. The point is tone. And children are the best musicians of tone because they sing without owning anything. If you want to know what a kingdom actually believes about its ruler, don't ask the men with opinions, ask the girls with rhymes. The path from court to market is not a straight road. It is a braided river. One braid carries injury. Someone has paid a duty twice and therefore demands a story that makes the double payment make sense. Another braid carries admiration. Someone saw the king hold a silence correctly and wants a legend to fit that silhouette. A third braid carries fear. Someone heard a latch and slept badly. In the crossing and recrossing, the water lifts silt, and the silt is what sticks. By dusk, the day has produced a litany of the plausible, that the king has a secret doors in the corridor wrong, but meaningful, that his seal will not impress wax unless he means mercy untrue, but beautiful, that his treasurer keeps 3 ledgers, one for God, one for men, and one for himself unlikely, but useful. The market sells carrots and consensus. Both go home wrapped in paper. Elsewhere, the pen learns to laugh. A lamp burns in a room where a poet copies himself out neatly, testing the balance of mockery and melody. Satire is the polite conspiracy between those who know better and those who want to. It paints the king with a brush whose bristles are sharpened by hunger and disappointment and amusement braided together. The figure that emerges is not a portrait but a crest, a jaw set too hard, a purse string tied too tight, a crown that slips to one side when the music starts. The jester owns no truth, but he owns timing, and timing is what turns gossip into memory. A broadsheet illustrated by a hand that draws horses better than faces spreads like dandelion seed. The woodcut shows the monarch at a long table, goblet exaggerated, nobles with noses pointed like weather vanes. The caption mercifully brief does more work than all the lines together. A single phrase that rhymes just enough to survive in a mouth not trained for meter. The image is not proof, it is parole, a temporary release for frustration that would otherwise require a cell. People hold it up to the light, laugh in the same places, and then fold it twice and tuck it where bread is kept. By the time the paper is greasy, the joke is doctrine. Symbols do the heavy lifting. A fox in the corner of a cartoon makes a better argument about cunning than a paragraph could. A scale tipped toward a pastry instead of a sword becomes a theorem about priorities. A tiny key drawn on a string around the king's neck says more about control than an audit. Satire loves the emblem because emblems travel on sleeves, in songs, across cups. A rumour is fragile until it learns to wear a picture. Once the picture exists, erasure becomes unlikely. You can argue with a sentence, you cannot argue with a fox that seems to look like someone. Mockery is not evidence, but it encourages agreement in rooms where evidence would stumble. It allows the cautious to participate without promising too much. It allows the bold to overreach without being arrested by the grammar. It changes "I heard" into "we all know," and then into "as everyone has always known," which is the staircase by which the present sneaks into the past and writes its initials there as if it had been invited. The king becomes not a person to whom things happen, but a type, and types are easy to file, hard to forgive. Language climbs ladders of its own making. The first rung is scandal, a word that implies an event, a night, a mistake with a date. Scandal can be survived. It sleeps, it wakes, it loses interest in itself. The next rung is vice, a word that suggests habit. Appetite with a schedule. Vice accumulates weight like winter. It implies infrastructure suppliers, hours, accomplices, and once people have imagined the infrastructure, they begin to see it everywhere, like a constellation that won't stop arranging stars. The highest rung is depravity, the place where behaviour is not only frequent, but a philosophy. Here, a king isn't a man who feasted. He's a man who believes feasting is the proper form of prayer. Each rung makes the last seem naive. Once a tale is promoted, demotion is rare. Scandal sounds quaint the week after Vice is printed. Vice sounds hypocritically generous the month after depravity sells out its second edition. Words are stairs with no convenient landings. A prudent scribe might try to step back down, according to the chronicle of a letter suggests. Tradition relates that, but prudence is not fashionable next to a story that snaps shut like a purse. Crowds reward certainty the way treasurers reward collateral. The markets do not mind this escalation. Markets price it. A saucy rhyme fetches 2 coppers, a vulgar one fetches attention, a dangerous one fetches a fee from a man who insists on paying in the corner and prefers not to be thanked. Carvers find themselves asked to decorate cupboard doors with tiny foxes that look like no fox, but every rumour. Tailors are told to stitch linings of a certain colour, because colour whispers in corridors more safely than claims do. Even silence is recruited. Certain houses do not discuss certain subjects, and because they do not, guests enjoy guessing why. Absence is rumour's favourite flavour. It makes it taste like permission. Meanwhile, in rooms that smell of beeswax and the patience of men who resist metaphors, scribes continue to date entries and place names carefully beside them. They do not accuse, they note. They write that a meeting was held and an oath renewed. They add that a messenger was sent by night with instructions that arrived by day. They mention that the feast fell on a Friday, but that the dishes were suitable for Friday. They imply with commas, they hint with order, then they stop. The chronicle's restraint is heroic and frequently ignored. A reader who arrives seeking scandal finds only sequence. A reader willing to see sequence discovers scandal is often a misreading of translation. When abundance translates into security for one group and into anxiety for another, the word that survives is the word with the better tune. Still, there are entries whose caution cannot hide the weather. One will say a certain lord found the king's hospitality inconvenient, which is to admit there was a door and that it closed. Another will report a charter was reconsidered and altered, which is to say that favour is negotiable when the treasury is not. Letters according to copies preserved speak of persons who were asked to rest from public duties for a period during which their appetites would become less confusing. No one writes the word punishment. They do not need to. Readers have dictionaries built from taverns. A kingdom lives by its labels at least as much as by its laws. Once the label wasteful attaches to a reign, prudence looks like stinginess and generosity looks like confession. Once the label cruel attaches, command sounds like spite and firmness, like vanity. Once the label corrupt attaches, mercy reads as purchase and piety as theatre. Labels are stamps that harden as the wax cools. Argue too loudly against them and your argument will be taken as proof that the seal was needed. The injury of reputation is that it moves faster than repair. The court can change habit, it cannot change chorus. It can lower the candles and thin the sauces and rename the gifts. The market will continue to sing the tune it has learned because the tune is good for business and better for memory. To fight a ballad is to enter a duel you cannot win unless the ballad gets bored, and ballads do not get bored when they can change costumes. Today the king is a glutton, tomorrow he is a miser. The day after he is both. In alternating stanzas that reconcile perfectly at the refrain, there is a temptation to despise the crowd for loving a story more than a statistic. Resist it. Statistics are what the crowd uses to feed its children. Stories are what it uses to place its children in a world that often refuses to explain itself. If a man pays a fee twice, he may accept the number. He will remember the rhyme that made sense of the number. If a woman hears that a jewel was pledged to pay men who will keep her road safe, she may accept the ledger. She will remember the woodcut that made the jewel look like a moon that wandered. Story comforts the bruised place that arithmetic can only name. The court can participate in the chorus without admitting it does. It can stage acts of visible modesty that teach a new refrain good bread. Plain candles, processional routes that pass the same two corners where the city feels seen. It can sponsor a saint's day with spare music and very clean linen. Then invite the chroniclers to note the clean linen and the spare music. It can permit a satire so light it floats and then applaud it as if it hurt, which is a way of telling the sharp poets that this is the current acceptable edge. It can allow a caricature of the treasurer that is funny enough to sell, but inaccurate enough to leave the important tools unexplained. In the long run, the kingdom's memory will bank on scenes, a generous procession in a lean year, a quiet audience in which a grievance was listened to without defence, a morning when the king walked without guards among merchants who had agreed beforehand not to sell him anything, an evening when the chapel's anthem chose restraint over triumph. These do not erase the cartoons, they complicate them. Complication is not a cure. It is a climate in which cures become thinkable. Still, the hardest part comes last, learning to live under a name that has been lazily glued to your door. Once glued, it collects dust. Dust makes glue eternal. A reign called wasteful must spend its thrift in public for years before the adjective begins to lose its shine. A reign called cruel must cultivate gentleness with the patience of gardeners who don't mind being mocked for planting what they will not harvest. A reign called corrupt must perform transparency long after the audience has gone home yawning. The work is absurd, the work is necessary. History is an untidy clerk. It files by convenience and updates infrequently. If we step back to the square where the day began, we will find nothing dramatic, just traffic. Children strip yesterday's broadsheet into boats and race them in gutters. A vendor sells pears that make a better argument for the kingdom than any sermon. Somewhere a man tells a story about a king who never laughs unless he has already counted the costs. And another man corrects him gently. No, he laughs because he is trying to forget the counting. A third man says both can be true, and the table nods because nodding is cheaper than choosing. On Sundays, the priest will climb the pulpit again and decide whether to raise an eyebrow or bow his head. On market days, the fish will sell regardless. The pen in the satirist's room will learn a new rhyme about a different official, because poems prefer novelty almost as much as treasurers do. The chronicler will set his hand to the page and write the date, which is the most honest line anyone will write that day, and above all of it, perched wherever rumour roosts when it's tired, the idea of the king will continue to molt and regrow its feathers, sometimes gaudy, sometimes plain, almost never accurate, always useful. If there is a lesson for us quietly, while the street reknits itself, it is to hold our sources like lanterns, not like verdicts, according to the chronicle of maybe a window. A letter between X and Y suggests maybe a corridor. Tradition relates that maybe a garden gate into a memory that belongs as much to feelings as to facts, and satire smiling, disreputable, indispensable may be a weather vane that points not to the truth but to the wind in which truth must walk without losing its hat. What remains is the stubbornness of names and the appetite of ears. Once a label is lodged wasteful, cruel, corrupt, or its more intimate cousin. Depraved, the work of removal is slow and unglamorous. It is done in kitchens and counting rooms, in chapels and courtyards, by the tedious repetition of acts that do not rhyme. It is rarely applauded, it is sometimes noticed, and sometimes, years later, a child's song loses a verse, and no one remembers where it went. That is as close to victory as reputation allows. For now, let the square keep its gossip. Let the broadsheet curl at the corners. Let the woodcut fox grin at the pastry scale and the little key dangle from the sketch of a royal neck. The day must proceed, the carts must move, the kingdom has bread to bake and promises to schedule. We walk away from the chorus not because it is wrong, choruses are almost never entirely wrong, but because the next room expects us, and the next room will be very quiet. In quiet, the labels sound less like thunder and more like what they are, chalk on a door that a careful hand can, with time, wipe away. The quiet room waits with the patience of furniture that has seen every version of a reign. Outside, the square keeps its chorus. Inside, the air smells of wax and linen, of paper that has recently agreed to be the past. Someone closes a casement and the city's vowels drop a note. What replaces them is small and deliberate, the thud of a seal, the slip of a ribbon, the cough of a clerk who remembers that he, too, is part of the music. If rumour is weather, this is roofing. If satire is a grin, this is the jaw behind it. Set at whatever angle today requires. The court has learned an ancient trick. When the world grows complicated, dress the complication as ceremony. Chaos is easier to swallow when it bows. Messages already drafted in private are refitted with velvet and brass, so they can be carried in sunlight without losing their composure. A week that began with a misstep becomes a procession. A decision that would have bruised becomes a benediction. A tax matures into an anniversary of gratitude. The hall rehearses its answer before the question has learned to speak. Watch the day assemble itself. Bells are consulted as if they were advisors. Banners are unrolled as if truth needed colour to stand upright. The steward sets the hour, which is not the same thing as the time. The hour is what suits the story. The master of revels adjusts the seams between spectacle and statement. When the king emerges, his face is less a face than a key turnet and locks open. The choir rises. The herald inhales. The crowd decides which emotion to feel and in what order. A parchment is read. It does not merely tell, it arranges. It arranges blame and promise, memory and forecast. In a paragraph that sounds like home, gifts appear, rationed with theatrical prudence. A hospital is granted a privilege. A guild receives a charter with a flourish that makes its letters feel heavier than they are. The moment of handover is engineered to be photogenic in the medieval sense, legible across a courtyard. Simple enough for a woodcut. The onlookers learn where to applaud. They also learn what to say later. Because the lines are short and repeatable, by nightfall a complicated compromise has learned to masquerade as consensus. A feast becomes a referendum with music. The opening grace lays down a thesis. Order and abundance are friends. The courses argue the point sweetly, the toasts vote. Glass by glass, what could have been remembered as pressure is remembered as pace. What might have felt like extraction is baptized as participation. People leave warmed, and warmth is the oldest consent. Behind this theatre a second craft hums, less visible and more exact. The management of what a kingdom knows. Information is a river with many mouths. The crown builds a system of little dams and bright mills, so that the river looks industrious while it is being directed. Messengers are given new routes that intersect where they did not intersect last year. The clerk in charge of copying a letter learns to copy it twice, one for the person addressed, one for the person meant. A rumour with teeth is fed something sweeter. A rumour with wings is shown a window that leads away from powder. Those who leak are not treated as poets or heroes. They are treated as mistrained pipes hissed, tightened, wrapped, sometimes replaced. The correction is conducted in the same tone the exchequer uses to correct sums, regretful, precise, not angry unless anger would be useful as ink. A few learn to sit in quiet rooms until their memory reduces to outlines. Most learn the new etiquette of timing. when to speak so words cost less, when not to speak so silence can be billed as discretion. Meanwhile, the court breeds good news deliberately, like early fruit under glass. Small victories are harvested out of season so that the table never looks bare. A town is visited precisely when its repairs are most visible. A charter is sealed on the day the sky remembers to be blue. Communiques, those cousins of sermons and stage directions, are composed to be durable in mouths. They wear verbs that travel well. They avoid corners. They repeat a phrase that resembles a road. People follow the phrase because roads make walking easier than fields. The heralds practice their punctuation so that the crowd will breathe in the right places. The palace wall acquires a notice board the city pretends not to read. It is placement, not paper, that persuades them when conscience knocks because the court knows the answer. Key, rites of contrition are scheduled with the same intelligence as festivals. A fast is proposed and observed with linen so clean it could be a form of argument. Alms are distributed where the angle of the street makes humility photogenic. The choir's book opens to a psalm that speaks of measure and mercy. The chaplain tilts the homily toward the phrase, appropriate abundance. No one is scolded, everyone is invited. People leave feeling included in goodness, which is better, politically, than being corrected by it. Charity becomes a stagecraft of relief. Loaves are handed with 2 hands, not 1. The king's palm rests just long enough on a shoulder to write a small paragraph of kindness that the market can quote. The gift is real enough to be felt and public enough to be useful. It does not erase the weak. It rearranges the week's furniture so that the bruise is harder to see. The effect, over months, is a soft normalization. Extravagance stops calling itself by its given names. It becomes decor, tone, a house style. Feasts are no longer exceptions that need special shoes. They are shoes the court wears to walk through ordinary days. The vocabulary changes. What was lavish is appropriate to the dignity of the crown. What was favour is recognition of service. What was indulgence is custom that binds the realm. The public learns the new dictionary because the new dictionary is easier to live with than the old arithmetic. This is not magic. It is maintenance. The maintenance of an image that turns appetite into policy and policy into something that looks like weather present, persuasive, and not any one person's fault. The administrative mind is not cynical. It is tidy. Tidy minds wish things to fit, and when facts refuse, they tidy the frame. Ceremony is the frame that fits most facts with the least resistance. Return to the hall and watch a day that might have broken learn to bend. Morning opens with a Te Deum because ships returned and none were lost, which is true in the sense that the ships we wish to discuss returned, and the sermon is structured to appreciate precisely those ships. Midday brings a general audience in which petitions are heard by sequence rather than severity, an arrangement that flatters time into seeming just. Afternoon adds a public signing of a grant that has been privately negotiated for months, and the signatures are large enough to stand in for confidence. Evening closes with a modest supper, modest meaning candles that choose not to be counted. The day, taken whole, speaks the sentence the court needed spoken. Our hands are steady. The men and women who keep this sentence balanced are artisans of angle. They know how to tilt a document so it catches light without showing its erasures. They know where the camera would be if cameras existed. They understand that the human eye believes repetition, therefore, repetition must be clean. The same phrase returns in 3 settings. At the chapel, in the courtyard, by the river gate, it acquires the sheen of a truth not because it is perfect, but because it has learned to walk like one. Information that would puncture the sheen is redirected into channels that reduce its speed. A ledger with an awkward column becomes a committee. A hallway argument becomes correspondence. An unfortunate timing becomes a review of best practices. The people who need to know are made to know with the gentle insistence of a waiter filling a cup that keeps finding itself empty. The people who do not need to know are invited to admire something else at precisely the moment they might have asked an intelligent question. The palace perfects the art of coincidence. A few are punished, carefully, politely, without fury. Not because punishment is delicious, good courts do not eat that diet, but because a diagram requires contrast. The offender is reassigned to a geography of humility. The announcement is written to be regretted aloud. The effect is not terror, the effect is order. A pleasant word in public that, in private, means the orchestra will hit its cue on time tomorrow. The best contrition is seasonal. It returns often enough to feel authentic and rarely enough to feel special. The king attends a vigil dressed in a humility the city has learned to trust on sight, plain cloth, with a memory of silk, a candle held with both hands. He says nothing quotable. The silence is the quote. Next week, a school receives paper and ink with a seal that looks workmanlike rather than imperial. The following month, a hospital door is repaired in a way that lets the carpenters be admired. None of these gestures demands conversion. All of them cool. Hot words lose their appetite in cool rooms. None of this would function without the archivists of feeling, those who keep record not of deeds but of perceptions. A woman in the antechamber who knows which families need the smile 1 degree warmer. A secretary who files letters by mood as well as by subject. A captain who drills his men to look at ease when they are at ease, because looking at ease is cheaper than proving it. These are the invisible spines of the animal we call image. When they are strong, the creature moves without limping, even on days when one leg is tired. The city notices. It begins to yawn less at ceremony and participate more out of habit. Children recognize the rhythm of processions the way they recognize the rhythm of rain. Shopkeepers glance at the palace window, where notices appear and decide whether to raise their awnings a little higher, because it will be a day that wants awnings. The church keeps its eyebrows, but lowers them strategically, in exchange for sentences carefully placed in the royal mouth. A phrase about mercy, repeated on a feast day. A phrase about duty, repeated on a market day. The two phrases learn to braid. Now and then the mask slips, because masks are masks, not faces. A letter arrives late, a rumour arrives early. A carriage breaks a wheel where a statue can see. The court responds not with panic, but with formatting. The error is framed as a lesson. The lesson is framed as a gift. The gift is framed as a future that would be uglier if not for today's grace. The audience prefers to applaud a rescue. It does not change the sum in the ledger, but it changes the temperature in which the sum is read. In the long echo, indulgence becomes boring, which is power's favourite victory. A thing that once provoked adjectives now earns nods. Rich tableware is described as the usual. The clap at a fanfare requires no rehearsal. Nobles who argued with their cousins about excess now argue about seating, which is theatre with friendlier knives. Merchants plan shipments around feast days because feast days have become logistics, not events. The gilt edges of the court's appetite are no longer scandal. They are calendar. The dangerous part of this victory is that it hides the bill. When luxury ceases to feel like luxury, cost pretends to be inertia, a stone rolling, because rolling is what stones do. The treasurer still hears the wheeze. The steward still counts the candles. The chaplain still knows which hymn calms a conscience most affordably. But the city believes that the shine is native to the crown, like gloss to a leaf. Gloss is not a sin. It is merely work disguised as nature. Disguise, done well, lasts a very long time. It is possible that a different world would demand a sharper cure. This world prefers continuity. Continuity is the cure that tastes like itself. The court offers it in small glasses, repeatable phrases, repeatable sights, repeatable gestures that suggest a machine humming in tune. The hum comforts, in comfort. Questions sleep, in sleep. A rain survives the hour that might have broken it, and in surviving, it claims the right to last until morning. In the counting room, a clerk closes a book gently, because the book includes today, and today is fragile. On the table nearby, the seal keeps its chip, proof that even authority has corners. The music on the stand is still open at the page where the key change waits. It has been waiting all evening like a friend who does not mind being late, if lateness helps the mood. Somewhere in the courtyard, a trumpeter practices a phrase that sounds like a rival. Somewhere in the chapel, a small candle learns to be brave by watching bigger candles do it first. We step back into the corridor, and the corridor accepts us, as corridors do. The walls hold their breath to keep secrets polite. A guard nods, which is a way of saying that order, however constructed, is presently present. We have watched how ritual swallows difficulty and teaches it to sing, how information is combed and pinned until it flatters, how conscience is cooled without being extinguished, how indulgence becomes furniture and furniture becomes the room. None of this is accident. All of it is craft, and craft, like any art, must be paid for. The bill does not arrive tonight. It arrives scattered here, a coin dearer than it should be. There are silence more useful than anyone would prefer. Elsewhere, a word that costs double because it was spoken too late. But that is the arithmetic of mornings, and the morning has not been invited yet. For now, the hall is set. The city is fed. The label makers have gone home humming the tune the court taught them, and the kingdom has the modest luxury of appearing to be itself a trick as old as crowns and as modern as any mirror. If you listen closely before the door closes, you will hear what this whole edifice has been saying with a patient smile. We have made our story coherent. Coherence is not truth, but it is portable. It can be carried through bad weather and remembered accurately by tired people. The task tomorrow will be the same as today's keep coherence fed. Keep the seams quiet. Keep the chorus humming a refrain no one hates. The task the day after will be harder, and the court will do what it always does when hardness arrives. Put it in costume and call it traditional, then it will proceed, and the city will proceed with it. Because proceeding in company is sweeter than being correct alone. The corridor has learned our footsteps by now. It gives back our echoes politely and keeps the rest. Morning is close enough to smell the cool of stone that has released its night heat. The faint iron of a city beginning to lift its shutters. Inside, the last candles have narrowed to needles. The map lies where we left it, the ledger, but the room feels different. It isn't the furniture, it's the permission. Something that once moved because everyone agreed to pretend now moves more slowly because some no longer do. Trust does not shatter in a palace, it thins. A goblet that once rang bright now makes a smaller sound when tapped. The first to hear it are the nobles who live closest to the resonance. They know a performance when they see one. They pay for performances with their own. They arrive on time but leave early. They bring gifts that declare nothing and obligations that announce less. Their letters grow longer in the salutations and shorter in the promises. They still smile, because smiles are cheap. But a new economy appears behind the teeth transactions in caution, savings in silence, small investments in elsewhere. Publicly, a baron thanks the king for a favour. Privately, he ensures the favour with a cousin the king cannot easily reach. He recruits contingencies, a clerk who owes him clarity, a captain who owes him wages, a chaplain who owes him the grammar by which an oath can be argued into meaning less than it did when wine was warm. Nothing is openly withheld, much is saved for later. Castles do not lower their flags. They simply practice the speed at which the flags can be lowered if needed. The commons catch the change by feel. It starts in price and ends in posture. Markets that once stretched into cheer now stretch into calculation. Men who could guess a levy to the penny learn to guess a pause to the day. How long until the next request? How long until the last promise finds its receipt? They do not revolt, not yet. Revolt is a language that needs verbs the day does not have. Instead, they invent a dialect of reluctance. They pay a fraction slower. They stand a fraction farther from the procession. They repeat the court's phrases with an intonation that files them under weather, not command. In the pulpits, churchmen adjust volume before they adjust doctrine. A sermon acquires an extra hinge, a paragraph that opens onto admonition without naming a sinner. The season becomes severe in a way that implies stewardship is not a costume to be rented for feast days. Letters travel to Rome or Canterbury with a particular politeness that means urgency. A hand that can crown can also cool. It does so with ritual rather than rupture, but cooling is cooling. It takes the fever down and leaves the skin a little less eager to sweat for the same songs. Trust, once thinned, changes the angle of every room. A council table that used to face the throne now faces the door. Men who loved surprises when favours were large learn to hate them when ledgers are larger. The realm becomes a place where before matters more than because. Show us the plan before you tell us the reason. The king, who once moved like music, now moves like math. Even success is read twice once for what it achieved. again for what it cost to achieve and what it will cost to keep. Inside the machinery, the oil grows sticky, decisions are made, but they are made with a new and cumbersome companion, calculation of appearances. Does this command sound like generosity to those who need it, to sound like justice? Does this tax look like providence to those who tally in psalms? To govern is to choose. Now every choice must also be explained in a language that flatters doubt. The pace slows. Caution, once a virtue, becomes a habit. Habits are harder to dismiss than enemies. The apparatus of favour, so nimble when the air was warm, begins to coil around the levers it once lubricated. A man is chosen for competence, and then, as if embarrassed by its own clarity, the court adds 2 men for balance. A message that should be sent at dawn waits for evening because the afternoon is better for optics. A budget that should be redrawn for reality is redrawn for impression, and then redrawn again the next month when the impression fails to outlast rent. The phrase after consultation appears in minutes, even when everyone in the room knows consultation meant pausing long enough for a convenient witness to arrive. There is a phrase whispered by stewards with tidy minds, the state within the king. It describes the narrow guild of appetite and loyalty that comes to act like a government issuing permissions, rationing access, writing a soft law in gestures and glances. When trust fades, that inner state thickens. It justifies itself with urgency. It tells the larger court that the weather is unstable and that only a smaller, drier climate can keep documents from curling. 1,000 petty customs accumulate around its edges. Who is briefed? Who is thanked? Who is quietly asked to wait outside? Soon the kingdom's public might remembers to knock, while the inner might forgets it should open. This is not tyranny, it is congestion. Traffic that once flowed through the arteries of office now detours through rooms that cannot scale. Petitions pile on desks that were never meant to hold them. Letters grow wings as they circle for signatures that take too long to land. The people who make things happen learn to spend mornings finding where the decision has hidden itself today. The result is a palace with 2 clocks, one that measures ceremony, punctual to the minute, and one that measures resolution, slow by a day and then by a week. Policy is not rescued by more pageantry, nor is it helped by parsimony masquerading as reform. A court that has learned to buy time with song will try to buy it now with scold. Neither currency meets the bill. Real choices must be made. Which wars to stop feeding, which favours to retire gently, which manners to leave alone so they can fatten for a season without a royal hand in their grain. These are decisions the inner state dislikes, because they are too large to be arranged and too visible to be forgiven, so they are postponed until they become unavoidable. By then, they are ugly. Meanwhile, the language of loyalty is bent into the language of credit. I have served begins to mean I am owed. I will serve begins to mean I accept your terms for the loan. The treasury, which cannot print gratitude, becomes the middleman. The court discovers, to its boredom and dread, that the interest rates of reputation are very high, when collateral is confidence. If confidence is impaired, the same promise costs twice as much to borrow. In the shires, the symptoms register as sidelongness. Juries who once deferred without resentment now defer with notes. Those notes are questions. Questions are weight. Sheriffs carry warrants with an extra sentence in their pocket in case tone must substitute for authority. Towns form committees with names that sound helpful and are, in fact, annoyed. They do not disobey, but they administer obedience at a measured rate. Obedience on a timer is the first politics of a people who have rediscovered the verb wait. What does this erosion do to a reign? It makes the spectacular smaller. Even a triumph has less height when it is followed by a paragraph that begins with, however. The court, sensing this, economizes its own amazement. It stages fewer miracles and calls them proofs. The public applauds, but as if the hands were tired. The king feels it in the lungs of the room the way air that used to rush to meet him now arrives. In private, a second erosion continues, the erosion of courage. Not the kind that rides into a field, the kind that signs a plain order at a plain table. Fear, once useful as a metronome, has taught too many people the music of self-preservation. They choose sentences that cannot be quoted against them. They propose the committee as the answer to the problem the last committee named. They become exact at the wrong tasks. If a window is broken, they draft a policy on glass. Diplomacy catches the scent. Across borders, men who never loved England learn to love pause. They draw her into correspondences that exchange seals more often than they exchange ground. A treaty that might have been a plan becomes a calendar. Deadlines crowd together like frightened horses. Each one is met in a way that convinces no one. Allies begin to watch with the fond. Patient cruelty of neighbours peering over hedges. Enemies practice the compliment that humiliates. Prudent, measured, realistic. If you stand at the window and watch the city when a reign's legitimacy is bruised, you'll see nothing romantic, nothing flaming. You'll see delays. A bridge that should have been mended by May is mended by Michaelmas. A guild that should have sworn a charter in July swears in September. A fair that should have bloomed blooms narrower. Delay is a kind of tax levied by doubt. It is paid in confidence, and confidence is not coin. It is time that cannot be hoarded, only spent. The long aftershocks begin as stories people tell to themselves, so they can sleep without redrafting the day. He meant well, says a noble who has discovered he does not. He was necessary, says a clerk who cannot imagine how to be otherwise. He was wicked, says a satirist who has rent to pay and knows the price of adjectives. These stories are not for the king, they are for the future. They become the primer from which the next generation learns its letters. The letters spell not only a man's name, but the interval in which power learned and unlearned its manners. A reign thick with pageant leaves behind a stencil. Future rulers hold it to the wall and spray their paint across its curves. The shape becomes familiar even when the colours change. A procession here, a penitence there, a generosity at dusk along the river. It all looks right because it looked right once. This is the gift and the injury, the gift of a repertoire that allows successors to perform continuity, and the injury of a rhythm that invites them to mistake repetition for repair. Memory applauds the rhyme and forgives the reason for not arriving. The label a king earns travels farther than the man ever did. It adheres to corners of the realm he never saw, and to decisions someone else will make in his name long after he is dust. Wasteful, cruel, corrupt, clever, necessary, each becomes a tool in another person's hand. A minister who needs to tighten belts will invoke the wasteful ghost. A bishop who longs for cleaner hours will summon the cruel one. A chamberlain who wants to reupholster restraint will cite the corrupt. The past becomes instrumental, an organ played to accompany whatever tune the present fancies. There are places where the echo is kinder. A procession remembered for its order teaches a city to line its children up neatly at the well. A tax remembered for being explained well makes a later levy easier to bear. A fast remembered for its honesty makes the next feast less guilty. Even cracked reputations cast useful shadows. A name shouted as warning becomes, to certain ears, a map. The country learns to navigate by ghosts. But inheritance is a paradox. It provides a story that helps a people believe they are continuous. It also supplies a shortcut that lets lazy minds stop thinking. We know what this is. They say when they do not yet, we know who this will be. They say before he has had his second morning. The future folds itself into old headlines because old headlines are warm. Warmth is welcome, it is not always wise. The court that survives the initial storm often discovers the calmer cruelty of expectation. Even when it reforms, it must reform in ways that look like the picture people have of reform. It must choose the right amount of plain cloth, the correct number of candles, the approved tone of contrition. It must continue to stage sincerity until sincerity grows from the habit. If it tries to leap straight to virtue, the crowd will boo not because they hate virtue, but because they distrust leaps. Leaps break ankles, steps remember flaws. So the steps continue, some are good ones. The inner state is thinned slightly. The larger state remembers its doors. The committee gives way, once, to a single signed order. That order holds. The treasury speaks in numbers for a season without needing adjectives to escort them. A victory is acknowledged without trumpets. The lack of trumpets is noticed and valued. A school learns more grammar because the king did not arrive to bless it. These are small acts, easy to miss in the daily dust. They are also the seeds by which a reputation in long time, can be persuaded to sprout something gentler than the thorns it left. And what of the king? The man inside the mask that outlived him. He becomes a useful character in stories meant to warn or steady. Some will claim he was a necessary villain. Others, a regrettable friend. The truth moves as slowly as a ledger being balanced by a tired hand that refuses to total wrong, even when wrong would be faster. He will not be fully read by anyone who did not breathe his air, but he will be used by everyone who needs a sentence to close an argument that would otherwise remain open, honest, and uncomfortable. If you ask the city what remains after the music quiets, it will point to habits of pageant, of payment, of explanation given with a bow. It will point to phrases that can be pulled from drawers and worn when the wind is cold. It will point to care, sometimes the coward's kind, sometimes the craftsman's. It will point, if it is kind, to a few mornings when power did the least theatrical thing possible and, without applause, kept its promise on time. We stand in the same room where we began, and we can hear the building remember itself. The seal says it can make the world nod. The ledger says it can make the world pay. The goblet, quiet now, says it can make the world relax. The music, still open at the key change, says it can make the world agree. We have learned that agreement is not belief, that payment is not pride, that nodding is not assent. We have learned that a crown can be the brightest thing in a room and still fail to warm it. The corridor calls us forward again because corridors do not believe in conclusions. They believe in doors and the next door after that. The court will continue, altered by its own arithmetic. The nobles will continue, adjusted by their own contingencies. The markets will continue, disciplined by prices. The church will continue, patient with human tempo. And history, impatient in its patience, will file this reign where it files weather that lasted longer than it should have, under season. Before we go, we leave one sentence on the table. Because tables remember sentences longer than people do, legitimacy is not the absence of complaint. It is the presence of consent given often enough to carry weight. When consent thins, the weight must be carried by craft, by ceremony, by careful edits. Until they do not, then the work becomes different. Another hand will take up the ledger. Another seal will cool with a chip that proves corners exist. The new morning will pretend to be new. The city will pretend with it. And somewhere, in a market not far from here, a child will sing a song one verse shorter than last year's. That is how reputations end. Not in thunder, but in a missing rhyme that no one misses until someone notices they don't. The room holds our silence like a cup holds the last warmth of wine. Outside, the city has begun its practical music barrows creaking, shutters lifting, the throat clearing of a day that must get on with itself. Inside, the map lies rolled, the ledger breathes shallow, the seal cools with its polite chip. We have walked through a court that taught appetite to look like order and fear to sound like wisdom. We have watched how a sentence becomes a ceremony, and a ceremony becomes a habit. If you tilt the whole story toward the light, John is less a monster than a mirror. The shine of luxury, the chill of suspicion, the hum of message craft braided together until biography hardens into a reputation the market can sing. He spent to appear abundant. He supervised to appear secure. He narrated to appear inevitable, and history, which loves a clean outline, filed him under notorious. Because notorious is easier to remember than complicated. The banquets were stages, the prisons were footnotes, the treasuries were lungs, and when the lungs wheezed, the music tried to sing louder. In the end, the loudness survived better than the breath. The gentle lesson is not a moral, it is a method. When history puts on rouge and a crown, it begs for applause. When it takes off its makeup, it asks for accounting. To understand what a reign meant, you count not just coins, but chairs moved, candles lit, letters copied, gifts timed. You watch ritual the way a captain watches weather, what it hides, what it carries, what it cancels. You assume the ledger is honest about the parts it dares to name, and you assume ceremony is honest about the feelings it hopes to rent for an evening. If the numbers lean, ask which adjective propped them up. If the procession pauses, ask who needed breath and why. Courts, like households, reveal themselves in receipts and rehearsals. The rest the grand speeches, the flattering portraits are chorus. They help you remember, not understand. Understanding lives in margins and menus, in how often a door closes softly, in how many times a seal is impressed in a week that claims to be calm. When you look there, the noise of scandal thins into structure, and structure is the only thing that explains why some nights end in thunder and others end in paperwork. Next time, we walk past the dais and through the veils. The question waiting there is both quieter and sharper. Who learned to turn proximity into policy when no one was supposed to be watching? We will trace the networks of favourites and companions, the rooms where introductions outranked edicts, where a bracelet could pass for a signature and a fragrance could read as a password. We will map the backstairs of influence, how tastes became rules, how private schedules steered public calendars, how a whisper at Compline could move a border by dawn. No gore, no gawking, just the choreography of closeness and the prices it set. For now, leave the work table as we found it. Seal, ledger, cup. Music open at the key change. Let the corridor take us back to daylight. And if you're still with me when evening returns, dim the lamps. Settle the room, and we'll pick up the thread where the curtain falls at the edge of the canopy, where power teaches preference to speak in a softer voice,